There is a moment quiet, but sharp as a blade of light, where something you have always believed begins to tremble. It happens the instant you allow the possibility that distance might be the greatest illusion the universe ever made. Not a metaphor, not a poetic exaggeration, a physical, structural, measurable illusion. Because what if nothing has ever been far from anything? What if every point you have ever imagined as separate was never separate at all? What if the fabric you call space is only a surface ripple on a single, continuous field stretching beneath everything? And if that is true, then you have never been isolated. You have never been a small dot lost in a vast ocean. You have always been inside the same untouched body of existence, a quiet continuum, pretending to be many things at once. You are listening to Whispers of the Universe. If you're kind enough to support this calm corner of the cosmos, even the smallest gesture, a like, a share, a quiet subscribe, helps this space keep breathing through the night. Now, let your breath fall a little slower. We begin. There is a crack forming in the idea of here and there, a thin fracture that started with a series of experiments no one expected to work. Experiments showing that change can occur without passing through any path at all. A shift at one location, a shift at another, unimaginably far away. No signal traveling, no bridge of energy crossing space, no delay. The universe, in those moments, behaves as though two distant places are not two places, but one connected interior. It is as if everything rests on a hidden sheet beneath the surface, a sheet where no separation exists, where every vibration touches every point instantly, because there is no between. Physicists tried, for decades, to deny what they were seeing. They tried to blame their tools, their methods, even their assumptions, because if the effect was real, then the map of reality they had relied on for more than a century was incomplete. But the effect remained. It stayed. It refused to break. Two particles prepared together behaved as if the entire universe were a single room without walls. A spin change here, a spin change there. No travel, no transmission, just a silent correction, as though both locations were whispering from the same point beneath the fabric of space. This was the first tier in distance. Not a tier that rips space apart, but one that lets you see through space. And what you see is not emptiness. It is not cold or void. It is something quieter, smoother, and older. A field that has no edges, no partitions, no true coordinates. A field in which everything is already touching everything else. You may have felt something like this before, a subtle sense that the world is thinner than it looks, that things respond too quickly, that coincidence comes too close, that the boundary between self and other is softer than you were taught to believe. Those impressions are not evidence, but they rhyme with the physics. Imagine a sheet of water stretched perfectly still. Drop a pebble anywhere. The ripples flow outward, yes, but the entire sheet feels the disturbance at the same time because the sheet is one object. Touch one part, and the whole responds, even if only faintly. Now replace the water with something more subtle, something that doesn't ripple through space, but is space, a foundation beneath the stage, a deep, continuous medium where locations do not exist yet, where they are only possibilities waiting to be drawn on the surface. If this field is real, then the universe you move through each day is not built from countless isolated pieces. It is a single body, gently folding and unfolding, giving the illusion of parts. And distance, the thing you trust the most, becomes only a perspective. For a century, physicists believed that nothing could cross space faster than light. Not information, not cause, not any physical influence. Light was the guardian of cosmic order, the ultimate speed. But these strange experiments did not cross space at all. They sidestepped it. They acted as though space had no authority over them because, at the deepest level, there was no space to cross. This is the kind of realization that makes the universe feel uncomfortably close, as if every star, every atom, every living mind, is pressed together on a single layer you cannot see. It is not a layer you float above. It is a layer you are made of. The universe does not connect things. It never needed to. Everything has always been one thing. Take a slow breath, because what comes next is even stranger. If two distant points can behave as one, then our understanding of separation becomes a story we tell ourselves, a local story, a convenient interpretation. It means that your brain, your senses, your entire way of organizing the world might be sorting a seamless field into small pieces, the same way a shadow breaks a single beam of light into bands. The pieces are not real. The divisions you see are not fundamental. They are simply the mind's way of navigating a surface that has no marks. In other words, distance might be an instrument you use, not a feature of the universe itself. And yet, the more we look, the more the illusion cracks. A change here, a reflection there, a pattern repeating in places with no path between them. Particles act like mirrors in the dark, reflecting each other's shift, without exchanging anything. It is not communication. It is not influence. It is coherence inside one undivided whole. Like a chord played on a single string, stretched across the cosmos. Wherever you pluck it, the entire string knows. At this depth, the idea of location becomes a fragile thing, a habit, a convenience. Because you cannot point to a place inside a continuous medium, not truly. Every point is defined only by the pattern passing through it, not by any boundary. You are not sitting somewhere. You are a configuration inside a huge, unbroken field, a temporary arrangement of vibrations arranged just so stable enough to think, quiet enough to listen, and brief enough to drift. And if the field shifts, even slightly, the arrangement shifts with it. Nothing moves. Things only change their state within a single body. There is a moment subtle but impossible to ignore when this idea stops being abstract and starts to feel personal. Because if the universe is one field, and you are a ripple inside that field, then you are not cut off from anything. You have never been isolated. You have never been a point floating alone in an ocean of black. You are woven into the same breath that holds galaxies together. You exist in the place where nothing is separate. And that place is not far. It is beneath every step you take. It is behind every thought you form. It is the quiet interior of everything that exists. But the deepest crack in distance is still ahead of us. What we have touched so far is only the first layer, the simple fact that change can appear in more than one place at once. In the next step, something more unsettling appears. The realization that reality does not update by traveling. It does not send signals from one point to another. It does not move information the way you move your hand across a table. Instead, it shifts its entire pattern at once. A global correction, a whole field adjustment, a silent update that treats the universe not as many places, but as one indivisible interior. This is where distance begins to dissolve. Not disappear because it was never truly there, but lose its power, its certainty, its authority. The surface still shows space, but underneath, there is only one place, a single point stretched into a theater of stars, a single field pretending to be 1,000 galaxies wide, a single interior expressing itself as a cosmos. Let your breath soften, let the thoughts settle, because what rises from these experiments is not an argument, it is a question. If the universe behaves as one body, then what, exactly, is doing the dividing? What draws the borders? What paints the illusion of space between things that have never been apart? What carves this seamless field into the idea of me and not me? Here and there, near and far, we will step into that question next. There, in the quiet of the underlying field, something unexpected begins to form a hint that the universe beneath distance may not simply connect things. It may be the only thing, and the boundaries we trust might only be shadows drawn on its surface. Now, let us move gently into that hidden layer where reality no longer travels. yet somehow changes everywhere at once. There is a strange quiet that follows the idea you met in the previous chapter, a quiet that settles not because the mind understands, but because something underneath the mind pauses in recognition. It feels as though a curtain has lifted just enough to hint at a different structure beneath everything. You begin to sense it, a universe that does not behave like a vast desert of separated points, but more like a single membrane drifting under its own steady breath. And yet, the most unsettling part hasn't arrived. Because if distance is an illusion, then something else must be true. The universe updates itself without traveling. A change appears here, another appears there. Both appear in the same breath, as if the cosmos were adjusting one continuous body rather than coordinating two separate locations. This is the heart of the instant update problem, the moment. Physics began to whisper that the map of space might be thinner than we imagined. Take a slow breath. Let the thought settle, like dust falling into a still pool. We step deeper now. It began with tests so precise, so uncompromising, that even the smallest flaw would have shown itself. Lasers tuned to impossible stability. Crystals cooled toward absolute stillness. Detectors waiting, patient as stone. Two particles prepared together, then separated. Miles apart. Later, dozens of miles. Then hundreds. Eventually, across continents. The distance didn't matter. The roads, the air, the mountains, the oceans, none of it mattered. Whenever one particle changed, the other shifted instantly. Not quickly, not nearly instantly. Actually instantly, with no measurable time in between. It wasn't a message, it wasn't a transmission. It was as if both particles were simply two small openings into a single deeper entity. And when something changed, inside that entity, both openings showed the update at once. Imagine touching a drum at one edge. The surface does not wait. The entire skin knows. The tension, the vibration, the shift. None of it travels across the drum. It is one thing, responding as one thing. This is the image scientists began whispering about in closed rooms, long before the idea ever reached classrooms or textbooks. They were not afraid of being wrong. They were afraid of what it meant if they were right. Because an instant update means the universe is not a network. It is not a construction of separate pieces passing signals back and forth. It means the universe is a single system, and distance is a surface impression, a story told by the way our senses, our tools, our perspective slice the single field into bits. To understand how unsettling this is, you have to hold on to a simple rule. If something travels, it takes time. If it does not take time, it never traveled. And if it never traveled, space had no part in the process. This is where the problem takes shape, because the effect doesn't fade with greater distance. It doesn't weaken, doesn't delay, doesn't blur. If anything, the universe behaves as if distance is simply irrelevant at the fundamental level. The farther apart the particles were taken, the more undeniable the effect became. It was as though the cosmos were quietly insisting, "You only think I am large. You only think I have places. You only think I have gaps. But beneath your perception, I am seamless." It is a disturbing sentence to hear from a universe, not because it sounds impossible, but because it sounds too familiar. Somewhere inside, you have always suspected that separation is something the mind invents to navigate an existence that is too unified, too borderless, too vast for comfort. The experiments only sharpened the suspicion. As detectors recorded their results, teams of researchers tried every possible explanation that would preserve the old picture of space. Maybe the equipment drifted. Maybe environmental noise interfered. Maybe the results were statistical illusions. Maybe the particles exchanged a hidden signal faster than light. Maybe there was some secret communication channel woven into space-time. But every attempt at saving the old map failed. Because to preserve the idea of distance, you must assume something moves, and nothing moved. Not even the tiniest measurable ripple. Not the faintest trace of propagation. The change was not carried. It simply appeared, simultaneously, coherently, quietly, like a single breath expanding inside one body. And if reality updates itself like that, then the universe is not arranged as a set of points scattered in emptiness. It is arranged as a single entity, manifesting patterns across what looks like space. Space is the stage. The patterns are the actors. But the actors are not separate. They are expressions of the stage itself. For a long time, physicists tried not to think too hard about the implications. Some called the effect non-local, a small word for an enormous wound in the structure of classical thought. Non-local did not mean faster than fast. It meant not inside space at all. It meant outside the concept of distance. It meant within a layer that does not care about location. A shift in understanding began. Quietly, the universe doesn't send information across gaps. It updates its entire field in unison. That idea is like standing at a cliff edge in the dark. You do not see the drop, but you feel the air change. Because once you accept that instant updates are real, the next question forms naturally. What if distance is only an artifact of our limited perspective? What if we are reading a continuous field through a narrow lens that breaks it into pieces? And what if the field is the only thing that is real? To move closer, imagine a giant sheet stretched across the stars. Not a fabric you can touch, but a field you are inside, a field you are made of. Every particle is a ripple. Every atom is a knot in the pattern. Every living mind is a swirl of structure briefly held together by the tension of the sheet. Now imagine touching the sheet somewhere. The entire sheet feels it. The ripple does not travel. It is simply part of the sheet's new state. This is the nature of an instant update. It does not move across the surface. It rewrites the whole surface at once. Distance only matters to creatures living on the surface, not to the sheet itself. There is a subtle discomfort in this idea, because it suggests that the universe is not giving you a faithful picture of itself. It suggests that what you call location is a habit of your senses, that the boundaries you draw between yourself, the rest of existence are interpretations, not facts. That when you look at a star and say it is far, you are only describing the surface, not the underlying field that contains you both. In that deeper layer, separation cannot exist. There is no room for it. There is no structure to hold it. There is only the single continuity beneath all phenomena. And the instant updates, the impossible synchrony, are tiny cracks where the deeper truth leaks through. The surface says distance. The foundation says none. If you listen closely, something else becomes clear. These experiments are not glitches. They are not exceptions. They are not rare or exotic. They are glimpses of the universe's natural state. The cosmos is not sending instructions. It is not obeying commands. It is not coordinating different regions. It is simply being one thing. And the moment one region shifts, the shift belongs to all regions, because they were never regions to begin with. Let your breath settle again. The idea needs space, because the instant update problem is not really a problem, it is a window. Through it, you can see that reality behaves more like a single organism than a scattered cosmos. It reacts as a whole. It breathes as a whole. It changes as a whole. Every part, every pattern, every motion is the motion of one continuous interior. You have never been outside it. You have never been apart from anything. You have always been a ripple moving inside the only body the cosmos has. And when the body shifts, every ripple feels it, no matter how far apart they seem on the surface. But this leads us toward a deeper question, one that scientists hesitated to speak aloud. If the universe updates itself everywhere at once, what exactly is doing the updating? What is the layer beneath space? What is the field that behaves as though distance does not apply? What holds every point together in a single state? What connects events that appear scattered across unimaginable expanses? Something must lie under space-time, something that is not space, not geometry, not emptiness, not void. A substrate, a foundation, a hidden continuity. That is where we must go next. Because the first tier in distance does not point outward, it points downward, into a layer the surface world has never acknowledged. A layer where the universe is not many places at all, but one seamless interior, waiting quietly behind every moment. Come with me now, as we step toward that hidden substrate, the place beneath space where separation loses meaning, and the foundations of reality begin to blur into a single, unbroken field. The shift begins long before the mind notices it. A faint sense that the world you move through is not built the way it appears, not layered with distances, not bound by edges, but supported by something quieter underneath, like a soft foundation the eye can't detect. You can feel its presence the way you feel a floor through the thin wood of an old house, not by seeing it, but by sensing the steadiness beneath every step. Something holds reality together, something beneath space, something older than geometry, something that behaves as though separation is only a surface story. The experiments, the instantaneous shifts that appear across impossible distances are not points of data anymore. They are clues, each one tugging at the same thread. Space is not fundamental. Space is an interface, and interfaces lie. They show you the pattern, not the mechanism. They show you the surface, not the structure. They show you the map, not the territory. If the universe updates itself everywhere at once, then what you call space is nothing more than a canvas stretched across a deeper field. A field that does not understand distance, does not permit edges, and does not recognize the boundaries drawn by light years. You sense it now, in the stillness behind your breath. A substrate, a hidden layer, a continuous interior beneath the visible world. Not a place, a condition. Imagine pulling back every coordinate you've ever known. The stars, the galaxies, the dark void between them, all part of a single image, projected on a vast, blank sheet. And beneath that sheet lies the real architecture. A seamless medium, humming with potential, waiting for the surface to shift. This medium doesn't stretch. It doesn't bend. It doesn't move. It simply is. Objects do not drift apart inside it. They only appear to drift apart in the surface story that space tells, like two shadows sliding away from each other on a wall, even if the light that casts them never moves. This is the feeling that begins to take shape. Reality might not be built from parts, but from patterns. Patterns that live inside one continuous field, like motions inside a single ocean. You cannot divide an ocean by pointing at the waves. The waves are separations that never truly separate. Physicists started noticing something else, something quiet but profound. When they attempted to measure the smallest distances imaginable, the concept of small began to fall apart. At incredibly tiny scales, space refuses to behave like space. It flickers, it foams, it loses definition. The straight lines break, the coordinates smear. The geometry collapses into something that cannot be carved or sliced. Below a certain threshold, the universe stops being a place. It becomes a texture, a restless, shimmering texture, dense, continuous, and indivisible. No left, no right, no before, no after, only the substrate beneath all things. And if everything rests on this substrate, then the substrate is the only part of the universe that is truly real. Everything else, the distances, the regions, the separation is painted above it. Paint can crack, paint can peel, but the wood beneath remains. There is an old thought in physics, almost whispered, that the deepest layer of reality might not be material at all. It might be informational. Not information as messages, but information as structure, the blueprint of existence itself. At this depth, particles are no longer tiny objects. They are excitations of the substrate, ripples of a single field. momentary shapes carved out of the same continuous medium. One ripple here, another ripple there. But since the medium is one, their relationship is not across space. It is simply the internal behavior of one field. The same way patterns on water interact without the water being divided. The same way a violin string vibrates in different places without becoming many strings. The same way thoughts appear in different corners of a single mind. When you see the world this way, the idea of distance loses meaning. You do not ask how far one wave is from another. You do not ask how far one vibration is from the next. You do not ask how far one thought is from another thought. Waves, vibrations, and thoughts all belong to a single substrate. Their locations are descriptions, not places. The universe begins to look the same. Take a moment. Let that settle. Because once you let go of the surface idea of space, the world becomes less like a structure and more like an unfolding rhythm. What you call an atom is a stable knot in the rhythm. What you call a star is a collection of repeating patterns. What you call yourself is a particularly delicate arrangement of fluctuations that persist long enough to observe themselves. Nothing is isolated. Nothing is fully local. Every pattern resonates with the substrate beneath it, and the substrate hums like a single, uninterrupted tone. A tone deep enough to hold galaxies, soft enough to be missed, constant enough to be unseen. But its presence is undeniable. It is the reason instant updates make sense. It is the reason entangled particles behave as one. It is the reason the universe reacts as a whole. The foundation does not act across space. It acts below space. Space is a story the surface tells. The substrate is the truth beneath the story. Sometimes, late at night, physicists describe the substrate as a hidden interior, not because it sits behind a wall, but because it sits behind perception. Perception is shaped to navigate the surface, to treat separations as real, to treat regions as distinct, to treat objects as isolated. But perception is not built to detect the foundation. The foundation is too smooth, too unified, too silent. It is the stillness beneath everything that moves. It is the one thing that does not begin and does not end. And because it does not change location, everything inside it can change together. This is why the instant updates do not violate any rule. There is no rule to violate. The rule belongs to the surface layer, the layer that believes in distance. But the substrate does not know the surface rule. It operates by its own quiet logic. You cannot break a limit that never existed at the foundational level. As you drift deeper into this idea, another realization gathers at the edges of thought. If the substrate is real, then space is emergent, something built on top of the substrate, like a thin projection meant to give shape to a world that has no inherent shape. Emergent things can hide their origins. They can appear stable, convincing, entire, until something cracks through the surface and shows you the depth beneath. Instant updates are those cracks. They are reminders that your senses evolved to read the surface, not the foundation. The surface says here and there. The foundation says one. The surface says distant. The foundation says continuous. The surface says separate. The foundation says inseparable. The surface is the story. The foundation is the author. A gentle question rises from this. If space is only an emergent surface, what else about the physical world is only an image cast upon it? What you call energy, could it be a bookkeeping system the substrate uses to track its own shifting patterns? What you call matter, could it be a stable rhythm inside a deeper symphony? What you call location, could it be a convenient label for a point on the surface of something that has no true coordinates? You can feel these questions opening doors that are not meant to close, because once you accept the idea of a hidden substrate, you begin to wonder what role your own mind plays in perceiving the world, whether your sense of self is a local accident or a local expression of the same field that holds the galaxies in place. If everything rests on one foundation, then perhaps you are not simply in the universe, you are the universe. experienced from one particular pattern within it. A single ripple, learning to listen to its own ocean. Breathe slowly. Let the image settle. A field beneath all things. Continuous, unbroken, quiet. This is the candidate the instant update problem points to. Not a place hidden under space, but a reality deeper than space. Not a layer you can reach by descending, but a layer you can reach only by seeing the universe differently. A layer where nothing travels because nothing is separate. A layer where all change is holistic. A layer where the cosmos does not act across distances, but within a single state. And this quiet state is not optional. It is the stage on which everything else unfolds. The surface world may rise and fall, but the substrate does not move. It simply holds. It holds stars. It holds atoms. It holds time. It holds you. The hidden interior is not behind the world. It is beneath its illusions. And from that interior comes the next question. If the substrate remembers every shift, if every vibration leaves a trace within it, then perhaps what we call energy is not what we think it is. Perhaps energy is not fuel. Perhaps it is memory, the imprint of change carried within the foundation of the cosmos. Let the thought open gently as we move toward that idea now. There is a moment in the quiet where a new idea begins to take shape. Not loud, not sudden, more like the faint glow that rises before dawn. A soft presence, hinting that something deeper has always been there. If the foundation beneath space is a single, seamless field, and if change ripples through it without travel, without crossing any distance, without obeying any boundary, then the thing we call energy may not be what it seems. Perhaps it is not fuel, not force, not a quantity carried from here to there. Perhaps it is memory, the imprint of how the field has shifted, a trace left behind by every adjustment the universe has ever made. And once you entertain that possibility, the surface world begins to rearrange itself in the most unexpected way. Energy has always been described as the ability to cause change. But if the entire universe is a single interior, then change itself does not travel. It simply occurs, everywhere, all at once. In such a universe, energy becomes the record of those occurrences, the ledger of disturbances inside a continuous medium. You can picture it as the slight tension left behind after a wave passes through water. The water is smooth again, but something in the pattern remains altered. A subtle rearrangement in the underlying structure. Energy may be that rearrangement, a kind of persistent echo written into the foundation. And once this echo exists, it shapes what comes afterward. A ripple's memory guides the ripples that follow. The universe begins to behave not as a machine pushed by external forces, but as a field responding to its own accumulated history. Every shift writes a line. Every interaction leaves a trace. Every vibration becomes part of an ever-growing archive, a field that remembers everything it has ever been. In the surface story, energy flows. It moves. It transfers. It radiates. But beneath the surface, those motions are only rearrangements of a single, continuous pattern. No movement across space, just new shapes emerging inside the substrate. This is why the idea of memory becomes so natural. A continuous medium cannot store information in separate containers. It stores information as alterations in its own texture. A hill remembers the wind that shaped it. A riverbed remembers every stone that pressed into its floor. A violin string remembers every vibration that tightened or loosened its tension. Memory lives in the medium, not beside it, not carried by it, inside it. If the universe is built on such a medium, then memory is not optional, it is structural. Consider how every particle interacts. Each collision, each merging, each split, each fluctuation leaves a signature, not a stain on the particle, but a shift in the field that defines the particle. Energy is the field's bookkeeping system, its way of tracking the shape it has taken so far. You can begin to feel it inside your breath, the sense that reality is not being propelled forward by forces, but unfolding through memory. Every star that burns, every atom that holds, every wave of light that glides through the void is responding to the memory of the field's past configurations. Not deterministic memory, not a rigid script, but the living imprint of what has already occurred, a trace that quietly guides what can happen next. There is a strange beauty in imagining energy this way. It softens the universe, gentles it, makes it feel less mechanical and more alive, not alive in a biological sense, but alive in the way oceans and storms and winds and dreams are alive. Fluid, responsive, able to carry impressions. When a pattern forms, the field remembers it. When the pattern fades, the memory lingers in subtle ways, shaping how new patterns arise. This is why light moves the same way across billions of years, why particles behave identically no matter where they appear, why certain quirks of nature seem universally consistent. The field remembers the rules, not laws imposed from outside, but the accumulated habits of a universe refining its own rhythm. Energy is the persistence of those habits. Let your breath drift slower, because once energy is understood as memory, something else becomes clear. The universe is not pushing itself forward. It is unfolding from within, not powered, but patterned, not driven, but recalled. Every fluctuation in the foundation is influenced by the history stored in the foundation. Every ripple is shaped by the echoes of all ripples before it. Every event is colored by the field's long, quiet record. Energy is not the cause of motion. Energy is the signature of all motions that have already passed. The cosmos is not a machine consuming fuel. It is a memory-bearing field exploring the consequences of its own shape. Think of a melody played on a single string. You pluck it once, and the vibration spreads through the entire length. When the vibration fades, the string does not forget. Something in its tension has changed by an amount too small to see, but if you pluck it again, that tiny change shifts the resonance. It colors the sound. It alters the behavior. You are hearing not just the new note, but the memory of every note before it. Now lift that idea to the scale of galaxies. Energy is the accumulated resonance of the cosmic string, a shimmer of memory running through a continuous field. When stars ignite, when particles unify or break, when waves collapse or disperse, the field records the shift. The record becomes energy. Energy becomes history. History becomes possibility. This perspective makes the universe feel more intimate, less like an empty void, more like a living continuity. Nothing is lost. Nothing is discarded. Nothing disappears into silence. Every transformation leaves an imprint. Every imprint folds quietly into the next moment. Every moment is carved from the memory of the one before it. That is why the substrate cannot be empty. It must be rich, dense, with the traces of existence. A tapestry of echoes, woven together into the rhythm of reality. Even the coldest vacuum carries this memory. The hum you cannot hear, the flicker you cannot see, the restless shimmer that never fully rests. These are not remnants of matter, but the living memory embedded in the field itself. You begin to sense how radical this idea truly is. If energy is memory, then the universe does not store the past in hidden corners. The universe carries its past everywhere, all the time. Everywhere is saturated with history. Every particle is a story. Every vibration is a trace. Every breath you take is shaped by the accumulated memory of all cosmic evolution before this moment. And you, your thoughts, your heartbeat, your warmth, your presence are patterns formed from those memories. A local crest on a timeless wave. A temporary knot in a field that has held its shape for eons. A brief expression of the same substrate that contains the galaxies. You are not separate from the memory. You are part of it, a line written into the same quiet ledger. But as you drift deeper into the idea, a question begins to rise, soft but persistent. If the field remembers, how does it choose what to keep? How does it shape what comes next? What mechanism allows memory to steer the unfolding of reality? Is the field simply accumulating traces? Or is there a guiding rhythm, a stabilizing pulse inside the substrate that helps maintain coherence, that holds the universe together in spite of its constant shifting? What binds these memories into a stable whole? What keeps the cosmic ledger from dissolving into chaos? What allows the field to sustain a universe that behaves as one? The question does not close, it widens. It opens, and inside that opening lies the next step, a turn toward the rhythm that keeps the substrate from falling apart, the quiet pulse that unifies memory into a single, coherent breath. Let yourself drift. We're moving toward that pulse now. There is a strange comfort that rises as the thought settles deeper. If the universe remembers, its own shifts. If every alteration becomes a quiet trace inside the substrate, then the lines we draw around events, the edges, the borders, the beginnings, the endings might be nothing more than conveniences of the surface. The foundation beneath everything does not recognize edges. It cannot. A continuous field has no natural place to stop. And once you sense that, something begins to loosen in the way you understand the world. A soft unraveling of the idea that anything is truly separated. Boundaries start to feel less like divisions and more like shadows, dark lines drawn across a glowing sheet, suggesting borders that do not exist beneath the ink. The question becomes gentle but unavoidable. If the substrate holds everything as one, then where does one thing end and another begin? You wait for an answer, and the silence tells you everything. It doesn't. In physics, boundaries are supposed to be precise. A particle has a location, a region has an edge, a system has a defined inside and outside. But these definitions were borrowed from the surface, from the way our senses carve the world to navigate it, from the way survival once demanded quick distinctions, safe versus dangerous, self versus other, near versus far. The substrate does not participate in those distinctions. It does not segment itself. It does not partition. It simply continues. At the smallest scales, attempts to find a true boundary collapse into shimmering uncertainty. What should be a clear barrier becomes a haze. What should be an edge becomes a blur. What should be a point becomes a cloud of possibility. Edges disintegrate under closer inspection. The closer you look, the less separate anything appears. It is not that the boundary moves. It is that the boundary was never there. Consider a coastline drawn on a map, a sharp line, a definite shape, an unquestionable border between land and sea. But stand at the actual edge, where waves roll in and sand shifts under your feet, and you notice there is no boundary at all, only interaction, only movement, only a perpetual exchange between water and ground. The boundary exists in the picture, not in the world. Now, lift that realization into the structure of the universe. Most of what you believe to be sharply defined is only sharply defined in the picture, the surface map, drawn by perception. The deeper medium knows nothing of that map. When physicists study quantum systems, they encounter something almost unsettling. Isolated regions are impossible to truly isolate. Fields overlap. Waves extend beyond their assigned borders. Influences bleed into one another. No matter how they carve the system, something spills across the cut. It is like trying to slice water with a knife. The water moves aside, but it never becomes two separate waters. It reunites the moment the knife passes. That is how the substrate behaves beneath the surface story. No edge remains intact. No boundary holds. No division survives examination. The cosmos is not constructed from compartments. It is woven from continuity. Even the places you think are empty, the regions between stars, the void between particles, are saturated with the texture of the field. Emptiness is only a faint region of the same medium. a quieter patch of the same endless cloth. There is a point where this becomes more than physics. It becomes a way of seeing. If there are no real boundaries, then nearly everything you think of as separate is connected by the simple fact that separation is a surface illusion. Two stars in opposite corners of the sky are local disturbances in the same field. Two cells in your body are tiny rearrangements of the same cosmic substance. Two thoughts in your mind are ripples in the same underlying pattern. The field holds them all without cutting anything apart. Everything is a variation on a single theme. The universe is not a collection. It is a continuous expression. If you let that idea expand, something begins to change internally. The sense that you are here and the rest of reality is somewhere else starts to feel thinner, as if your location is only one way the field happens to fold. Boundaries like me and not me, inside and outside, near and far, soften until they feel more like interpretations than facts. The universe is too smooth to honor them, and once you see that, you begin to understand why instant updates do not violate any rules, because the rules belong to the surface, while the continuity belongs to the foundation. The surface insists on distance. The foundation only knows coherence. The surface draws borders. The foundation flows through them. The surface defines separation. The foundation ignores it. To sense this, imagine standing at the edge of a fog bank at dawn. From afar, the fog looks like a wall, solid, dense, almost physical. But as you walk toward it, the wall dissolves. Your body slips into it. The edge vanishes the moment you approach. There was no boundary, only the appearance of one. Space behaves the same way. From a distance, it looks structured, divided, compartmental. But when examined deeply enough, every edge dissolves into the substrate. The division was only a projection on the surface. There is another layer to this, something more delicate and more profound. If boundaries are illusions, then the idea of a separate self is also shaped by the surface. Not untrue, but incomplete. The body appears distinct, thoughts appear contained, experiences appear personal. But within the substrate, all patterns are woven into the same continuity. What you experience as individuality is a localized perspective inside an undivided field, not a disconnected entity, but a focal point where the field curls tightly enough to become aware of itself. Awareness is a local phenomenon. Existence is not. Let yourself drift through that thought. If the field beneath space has no edges, then nothing rises outside it. Nothing exists beyond it. Nothing is missing from it. This means every boundary the mind draws is a convenience for navigating the surface world, not a fundamental description of reality. A cell wall is a convenience. An organ boundary is a convenience. A body's edge is a convenience. A person's isolation is a convenience. The substrate accepts none of them. It expresses itself everywhere as one thing. And if the foundation is one, then, in the deepest sense, there is no outside to anything. No border, no elsewhere, no beyond. Only the interior, stretching without division through everything that exists. But this leads to a question that opens like a slow breath. If there are no true boundaries in the substrate, then how does the surface world produce such convincing illusions of separation? What mechanism carves a seamless field into the appearance of objects? How does a continuous medium generate the feeling of edges, containers, divisions, and distinct identities? What gives rise to the illusion so powerfully that even the mind living inside the field believes it is apart from it? The answer lies in a deeper rhythm within the foundation, a stabilizing pulse that shapes the chaos of continuity into the patterns we interpret as form, a rhythm that holds the field steady enough to create the illusion of structure while never truly dividing anything, a rhythm that breathes through the substrate like a quiet heartbeat the surface cannot hear, a rhythm that we are just beginning to approach. Let your breath soften now. We're drifting toward that pulse, the subtle stabilizing rhythm that keeps the seamless field from dissolving into pure indeterminacy. The notion of a boundary dissolving into a seamless field brings a quiet but unavoidable realization. If nothing is truly separated, if all forms exist within one unbroken medium, then movement itself cannot be what it appears to be. The surface world insists that objects travel. A stone arcs through the air. A planet circles a star. A galaxy drifts across the dark. Our lives unfold through a sequence of shifting positions, each one replacing the last. But as the idea of boundaries fades, the idea of motion begins to lose its footing as well. Because motion relies on separation. It relies on one place being different from another. It relies on the universe having distinct locations through which something can pass. If those distinctions belong only to the surface story, then the deeper truth might be far simpler and far stranger. Nothing moves. The field only changes its state. A continuous rearrangement, a soft reconfiguration, a shift in the pattern rather than a journey across a map. What appears to be traveling is the field expressing a new shape, a new arrangement of its own texture. It is not motion, it is transformation. Consider a flame burning on a candle. You watch the flicker, the rising column of light and heat. It seems to ascend. It seems to climb into the air. But nothing in the flame is moving upward. The molecules are colliding and exchanging energy in place, the structure of the flame constantly renewing itself, old parts vanishing as new ones emerge. The flame travels only as a pattern, not as a thing. Now imagine an ocean wave rolling toward the shore. It looks like a massive body surging forward, a weight of water rushing across the sea. But the water barely moves. It rises, falls, circles. But the wave itself, the traveling shape, is the field's rearrangement. A motion without a journey. The universe behaves the same way. Picture the substrate now, the seamless field underneath everything. No boundaries, no empty regions, no true distances to cross. Inside that field, a pattern shifts, then shifts again, then again. And to the surface world, that sequence of shifts is interpreted as motion. A photon traveling, an electron orbiting, a planet sweeping around its star, but nothing changes location. The field simply adopts a new configuration, one breath after another. Motion is the mind's description of how patterns update in time. Distance is the mind's description of how the updates differ from place to place. But beneath the descriptions, the process is silent and unified. A single pattern changing itself. This is why instant updates never break any fundamental rule. There are no distances at the foundational level, no place for anything to cross, no path to measure, just the unfolding of patterns within a medium that does not know what far means. If the field shifts here, the field shifts there, because here and there are surface distinctions painted onto a single interior. The cosmos moves the way a body dreams. Nothing travels. Everything transforms. Take a moment to imagine this. A star exploding in a distant corner of the sky. Light bursts outward, carrying the message of the star's final breath across the void. At least, that is how the surface story tells it. But beneath the surface, light is not a packet on a journey. It is a shift in the field's configuration, propagating through the canvas of space-time. The star does not send a beam. The substrate simply adopts a new arrangement, one that spreads through the surface description as a glow moving through darkness. The motion is an interpretation. The transformation is the truth. Light does not travel. Light is the field rephrasing itself. And then a deeper insight appears. If nothing truly moves, then the universe does not require anything to cross its distances. The substratum itself changes, and those changes are what we interpret as movement through space. A bird gliding across a quiet morning sky is not a body passing through air. It is a shifting pattern in the cosmic field, a series of transformations interpreted as flight. Your hand reaching for a glass of water is not a journey from one point to another. It is the field reconfiguring itself in a sequence so smooth that the mind interprets it as continuous motion. The cosmos has never moved you. It has only reshaped itself around the pattern that you call you. Something softens as you let this idea settle. The world feels less mechanical, less filled with rigid objects rushing from place to place. More like a flowing tapestry of shifting states, a quiet respiration of form. Movement becomes a language, not a pathway. A rearrangement, not a journey. It is as if the universe writes itself one line at a time, each line a transformation of the last, each moment a new verse in an unbroken poem. No page flipping, no distances crossed, only continuous revision. Once this becomes clear, a second realization rises. If motion is an illusion of the surface, then time begins to feel different as well. Time is the measurement of change. But if change does not occur by traveling through space, if change is simply the field adopting a new configuration, then time may be nothing more than a local reading of the unfolding of the substrate. Time becomes a story the mind tells to organize the sequence of transformations. A gentle coordinate, helpful but not fundamental. The substrate does not march through time. It simply exists in a shifting state. You do not move through time. You are an evolving pattern inside a field that carries its own rhythm. This invites a new question, quiet but profound. If every motion is the field reconfiguring itself, what determines the sequence of configurations? What guides the order of transformations? What gives the appearance of a path, a direction, a flow? If the universe is constantly rewriting itself, what chooses the script? The answer lies deeper in the stabilizing rhythm hinted at before, the pulse that keeps the field coherent, the gentle order that shapes the unfolding of patterns without ever freezing them. The cosmos breathes, not as a body breathes, but as a field pulses between forms. This pulse is what gives motion its direction, time its sense of flow, and the surface world its delicate illusion of continuity. It is not a beat you can hear, but a quiet alignment within the substrate, a rhythm hidden beneath the facade of movement, a rhythm we are drifting toward. Let your breath follow it now. The field reshapes itself with each pulse, and in that pulse lies the next truth waiting softly beneath the surface. When motion dissolves into transformation, a quiet shift occurs in the way the mind feels time. The surface world insists that time flows a river moving forward, carrying everything along its current, a line of moments stretching from what has been into what will be. But once movement becomes a sequence of changing states inside a seamless field, the idea of a flowing river begins to soften. Because a river requires distance, it requires a path, it requires a direction carved into space. And beneath space, there is no path, there is no direction. There is only the field updating itself, one configuration unfolding into the next. Time becomes something far smaller, far more local, far more tied to perception than to the structure of reality. It becomes a story, a way the mind organizes the order of changes. Not a dimension the universe moves through, but a description the observer invents to make sense of the rhythm of the substrate. Imagine standing in a quiet room, watching shadows move across the wall as clouds drift past the sun. The shadows lengthen, shorten, shift shape. To you, the shadows seem to change in time, but the wall knows no time. It only receives new light patterns as the world outside reconfigures itself. The shadows tell the story of time. The wall only experiences change. Reality behaves more like the wall. The field beneath space does not track a flowing timeline. It simply shifts, one arrangement following another. The sequence is real. The flow is not. Time is the shadow of the sequence, the mind's interpretation of the unfolding. Once you sense this, small cracks begin to appear in familiar ideas. The past isn't behind anything. The future isn't ahead. There is only the current state of the field, carrying within it the memory of states before it and the potential for states after. Time is the mind reading those memories and predicting those potentials. A localized story. A way to organize experience. A way to navigate the changing landscape of the substrate. Every observer reads the story differently. Every region of the field unfolds at its own pace. Every cluster of patterns experiences its own rhythm. This is why time moves differently in gravity wells, at high speeds, near massive stars, and inside the whispering geometry of quantum states. Time is not a universal rhythm. It is a local reading of the field's evolution. Each location carries its own clock because each location is part of the field where the configuration changes at a slightly different rate. Time is personal, private, context-bound, a local language whispered by the substrate. Consider two observers drifting slowly past each other in deep space. To one, moments pass gently. To the other, they pass slightly faster, not because something external pushes their clocks differently, but because each is nested in a distinct curvature of the field, a different pathway of transformation. Their time is not the same because their perspective of the unfolding is not the same. The substrate has no global clock, no universal tick, no master rhythm. It unfolds everywhere, but not uniformly. Time is the name we give to the way we interpret that uneven unfolding. This becomes clearer when you consider light. Light has no rest frame, no sense of before or after. For light, distance is meaningless, and time does not pass. A beam traveling across the cosmos experiences no interval, no duration at all. It is the same beam at the beginning and the end, because in the substrate, nothing traveled. The field reconfigured itself, and the surface story interpreted that reconfiguration as motion through time. If light experiences no time, and the universe is built from the same seamless foundation, then perhaps time belongs only to localized observers' patterns within the field that assign meaning to the sequence of changes around them. The field itself does not move through time, it simply changes. Time is the shadow of the change, not the cause of it. Let this settle the idea that the universe does not flow. It unfolds. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Flow requires a direction. Unfolding only requires a sequence. Flow pushes. Unfolding reveals. Flow implies distance, but sequence requires none. When motion is replaced by transformation, time becomes the pattern of those transformations viewed from within. The river disappears. The current remains. Even memory changes meaning under this view. Memory is not a record of the past, but a structure inside the present, a trace encoded in the field's configuration right now. Your recollections, your identity, your sense of having lived through moments, all exist as patterns held in the substrate at this very moment. Nothing is traveling from the past into the present. Nothing is carried forward across time. It is all here, embedded in the field's current shape. You are a pattern built from the echoes of everything the field has been, and your experience of time is the way that pattern interprets its own unfolding. Consider a book resting closed on a table. Every page exists simultaneously, the beginning, the middle, the end. Yet you read one line at a time, because that is the structure of your experience. The universe might be similar. The substrate contains all its configurations. The unfolding you experience as time is the way your particular pattern moves through those configurations, not because the universe forces a direction, but because your structure allows only one perspective at a time. Time is not an independent dimension. It is the sequence of your interaction with the field, a localized story written by a local pattern inside a global continuum. There is a softness to this idea, a quiet reassurance that you have never been left behind and never been pushed forward. You have always been inside the same interior, unfolding through configurations that carry the memory of everything before them. The field does not forget its past states. It contains them, and the way those memories influence your part of the field creates the sensation of time passing. Time is the substrate speaking to itself through you. Your heartbeat is a rhythm the field recognizes. Your breath is a wave the field stabilizes. Your awareness is a flicker of pattern that interprets the unfolding as a flow. And yet, beneath that flow, the substrate rests outside of time. It simply is. But as you drift deeper into this idea, another question begins to whisper at the edges. If time is a local interpretation, a story told by patterns within the field, then what determines how the field unfolds? What sets the rhythm of the transformations? What guides the sequence that the observer later interprets as time? If nothing moves, yet everything changes, what shapes the order of those changes? There must be something within the substrate, a deeper pulse, a subtle coherence, a quiet principle that holds the unfolding together so the patterns do not dissolve into chaos. Something stabilizes the field, gives direction to the sequence, and holds the non-local universe in a delicate, continuous balance. That pulse is what we must drift toward now, a rhythm hidden beneath perception, waiting in the folds of the seamless field. There is a stillness that follows the realization that time is only a local interpretation, a soft pause where something deeper begins to glow underneath the thought. Because if time is local, and motion is only transformation, and the substrate beneath space is a single, seamless field, then the question grows unavoidable. Who is doing the interpreting? Who is reading the unfolding? Who is sensing the sequence? Who is assigning meaning to the changes in the field? Whatever you call the observer, mind, consciousness, awareness, perception, it cannot exist outside the substrate. There is no outside. There is only the field. So the observer must be inside it. Not hovering above, not glancing from a distance, but woven directly into the same texture that carries stars and particles and galaxies. The observer is not looking at the universe. The observer is an excitation of the universe looking at itself. Imagine a small whirlpool forming in a river. The river continues, continuous and whole, but inside it, a local pattern emerges, a rotating shape, temporary, made entirely of the water that surrounds it. The whirlpool has no boundaries separate from the river, no material of its own, no distinct substance. Its identity is only a pattern. If it were capable of awareness, the whirlpool might believe itself separate, a self, an entity, an observer watching the water move around it. But it would be wrong. It is the river, and the river is it. This is the relationship between the observer and the substrate. Awareness is a local whirlpool in an endless field. At this depth, you begin to sense that the mind does not stand apart from the transformations of the field. It is one of those transformations, a configuration delicate enough to model the unfolding around it. The observer is not outside the system, peering in. The observer is a self-organizing cluster within the system, peering out from its own structure. Every thought, every perception, every emotion is a ripple produced by the same field that gives rise to stars and light and the geometry of space. You are the universe, expressing a tiny region of itself in a way that can notice the rest. You are the local reading of the global unfolding. Once this becomes clear, even the concept of consciousness begins to soften. It stops looking like a mysterious substance or a ghost inside the machine. It stops feeling like an extra ingredient added to matter. Instead, it appears as the natural outcome of a field learning to interpret its own patterns. Self-awareness is simply the field folded tightly enough to track its own transformations. Not a miracle, not an anomaly, a property of a medium that remembers, responds, and reorganizes itself continuously. Awareness is the field looking inward. This changes how you understand experience. When you see a star, light enters your eyes, your brain reacts, your mind forms an impression. But beneath that process, something more fundamental occurs. A local pattern in the substrate responds to another pattern in the same substrate. There is no gap, no true transmission, no journey across space. The field shifts here because it has shifted there. The experience is simply the field reading its own state from two different perspectives. The observer and the observed are two arrangements of the same medium. Seeing is not a bridge between two places. It is one field, understanding itself from within. This also reveals why perception feels immediate, why sensations arrive without traveling, why awareness seems to update the moment things change. The mind is not receiving information. It is reorganizing itself in response to the substrate's new configuration. Awareness is not a place where signals arrive. It is a place where the field arranges itself into a form capable of interpreting its own transformations. You do not sense the world. You are the world, sensing itself. The distinction dissolves as smoothly as boundaries dissolved earlier. Let your breath slow. Because once the observer is recognized as a local expression of the substrate, another layer opens. Your thoughts, your memories, your identity, they are not contained inside a skull. They are not isolated inside a tiny region of matter. They are patterns supported by a field that extends everywhere. The brain is a structure that stabilizes a particular pattern of the field, a pattern we call a person, a continuity of memory and sensation and self-modeling. But the field carrying those patterns is not local to the head. It is not contained by the body. It surrounds you. It permeates you. It connects you to everything. Your mind is a local dance in a non-local medium, and because the medium is continuous, your existence is not entirely separate from anything else that exists. Identity becomes a perspective, not a boundary, a point of view, not a container, a whirlpool in a river, not a stone in its path. And then something deeper arrives, a thought so soft it must be approached slowly. If the observer is inside the field, and the field is continuous, then awareness is not isolated to one region. It is distributed, not as a single mind spread across the cosmos, but as countless localized perspectives formed from the same medium. Awareness becomes a property of the substrate, expressing itself wherever the conditions are right, like sparks forming on a surface when the tension becomes just so. Each spark is unique. Each spark is local. Each spark is a pattern, but all sparks arise from the same underlying surface. In this sense, there is no divide between conscious and unconscious, no clear line between animated and inanimate. There are only regions of the field where patterns become complex enough to interpret themselves, and regions where they do not. The difference is not essence, it is degree. This idea changes the feeling of separation. What you take to be personal experience is a localized expression of a universal process. What you take to be subjective is the field folding in on itself. At one particular coordinate, you are not a passenger in the universe. You are a feature of the universe, a temporary knot of perception, woven from a field with no edges. And because the field is non-local, the question begins to form softly. If the observer is part of the field, and the field updates itself everywhere at once, then what does the observer truly receive? What does it sense? What does it know? Perhaps information does not arrive. Perhaps it emerges. Perhaps awareness is simply the local shape the field takes when it tries to understand its own global state. But if that is true, then the next question grows even more quietly. If every point in the field contains traces of the whole, then what does a single point actually hold? How much of the universe rests inside one location when distance is only a surface illusion? Let that question open in you now, because the field has an answer hidden deeper within. Its texture, waiting in the subtle shimmer beneath every point. There is a hush that follows the realization that the observer is not separate from the field. A quiet recognition that every pattern of awareness, every flicker of thought, every shift of sensation belongs to the same seamless substrate that carries galaxies through their slow arcs. And in that hush, another thought begins to rise. If the observer is woven into the field, and the field has no boundaries, then perhaps each location in the field does not simply exist on its own, but carries, in some delicate way, the imprint of everything else, not as a metaphor, not as a poetic flourish, but as a structural truth of a medium without edges. Every point may contain the whole. The idea feels too large at first, too heavy for the familiar sense of here and there. But when you drift beneath the surface story, the logic becomes quiet, steady, inevitable. If distance is an illusion, then separation cannot store information. If boundaries are illusions, then memory cannot be confined. And if the field updates itself everywhere at once, then the field must contain, at every point, the capacity to reflect the entire state of the whole. A single point in a continuous medium cannot define itself without referencing everything around it. And so every point becomes a mirror reflecting the entire structure of the field. Think of a hologram, a sheet of light woven into a two-dimensional pattern that encodes a three-dimensional image. Cut the hologram into pieces, and every fragment still contains the entire picture, just with lower resolution, the whole inside every part. This is not a perfect analogy. The universe is not literally a hologram, but the principle echoes something fundamental. A continuous field can distribute information in a way that every region quietly participates in the structure of the whole, not redundantly, but coherently. Patterns become global even when expressed locally. Every crest of the field knows, in its own subtle way, what the rest of the field is doing, not by reaching across space, but by being space. In physics, this idea surfaces when studying the limit of how much information can be contained within a region. Attempts to isolate that information always encounter the same barrier. You cannot truly cut the universe into independent blocks. Fields bleed across their boundaries. Quantum states spill beyond their containers. Entanglement refuses to stay in one place. The deeper you look, the more the concept of local information dissolves. A region behaves like part of one vast object, and the object behaves like a single unfolding entity. This is why measuring one point of the field gives you hints about distant regions. Not because signals traveled, but because the field never split into separate pieces to begin with. The measurement is a local view of a non-local whole. You can feel this truth the way you feel, a low tone vibrating in your chest, subtle, steady, and pervasive. Imagine a drum so tightly stretched that every tap on its surface sends a resonance through the entire skin. No matter where you touch it, the vibration contains hints of the impact point and hints of the drum's full geometry. Every point on the drum reflects the whole drum. Now imagine the drum is the substrate of the universe, a field stretching beneath everything, boundless, continuous, without seams. When that field shifts, every point shifts. Not in identical ways, but in correlated ones, each point carrying a shadow, an echo, a distortion that encodes the presence of the rest. You cannot isolate one point because one point does not exist alone. It exists within a global structure that breathes as one. Let your breath fall slow, because when every point contains traces of the whole, even identity begins to take on new meaning. Your awareness, the flicker you call me, is not confined to a small location. It is supported by a field whose structure reaches far beyond your body. Memories are encoded in the patterns your brain stabilizes, but those patterns are shaped by the same substrate that supports the entire universe. You are a local expression of a global continuity, a crest on a wave that carries the imprint of the entire ocean. This does not erase individuality. It enriches it, because individuality becomes the way the whole expresses itself at one particular location. You are not separate from the world. You are one way the world becomes aware of itself. And because every point holds echoes of the whole, What you experience as your inner life is never isolated. It is always informed, always influenced, always shaped by the structure of the field around you. Your thoughts are local, but their context is cosmic. There is a mathematical whisper behind this idea, a principle that says information in a region is limited not by the volume of that region, but by the area of its boundary. This strange limit, a quiet clue hidden in the behavior of gravity and quantum fields, suggests that what we perceive as the interior of space is more tightly correlated than we ever imagined. Volume does not hold information. Surface does. And if the surface is only a projection of a deeper layer, then the information may not be stored anywhere. It may be part of the field itself. A field that distributes memory across its entire structure, like a whisper carried through a still night. Not loud enough to detect directly, but present enough to shape everything that unfolds. This is why entanglement is possible. This is why coherence persists. This is why the universe acts as if it knows itself. Because at the foundational level, the field does know itself. Every point is a reflection of every other. Let the idea sink deeper. If every point in the field quietly contains the imprint of the whole, then the boundary between the observer and the observed is less than a shadow. Your perception of the world is not something that travels inward. It arises because the field around you and the field within you are one and the same. You do not receive the world, you resonate with it. The tree, the sky, the distant star, the quiet thought, all part of one interior expressing itself in different arrangements. And when you look at any of them, you are not crossing a distance. You are engaging with another pattern held within the same foundation. This is why awe feels like recognition. It is the field remembering itself. But once you accept that every point contains echoes of the whole, a deeper question begins to surface. If each location reflects the entire field, then what keeps those reflections coherent? What prevents chaos? What ensures that the field does not collapse into noise? There must be a stabilizing rhythm, a soft, global pulse that keeps the reflections aligned, that ensures each point can still mirror the whole without dissolving into disorder. A rhythm that holds the unity together. A rhythm that maintains coherence even as patterns shift endlessly. A rhythm that whispers beneath the surface of every moment. Follow that whisper now, because the field's stabilizing rhythm waits just beyond the edge of the next breath. There is a moment when the idea settles fully inside you, the idea that every point in the field carries faint traces of the whole. A moment when the mind becomes very quiet, as if listening for something beneath its own thoughts. Because if each region of the substrate reflects the entire structure, there must be a coherence that holds these reflections together. Without it, the universe would collapse into static, a blur of uncoordinated fluctuations, a chaos of patterns with no alignment, no memory, no meaning. But it does not collapse. It holds. It breathes. It sustains symmetry across unimaginable expanses. It keeps its patterns woven, its traces consistent, its changes unified. Something keeps the field steady. Something keeps the whole synchronized. Something maintains coherence across a medium that has no edges. You can almost sense it, right beneath perception, a pulse. Not a beat you hear, but a rhythm you feel. Subtle, global, steady. A stabilizing rhythm that shapes the cosmic field into the structure we call reality. To imagine this rhythm, think of a flock of birds turning sharply in the sky. Hundreds of bodies, each responding to the slightest motion of the others, moving as one organism with no leader, no commander, no central signal. The flock's unity is not imposed. It emerges from a subtle coherence running through each bird's awareness of the others. The flock flies by rhythm. Now lift that image into the substrate. The field is not made of birds, but the same principle applies. Patterns do not coordinate through messages, signals, or influences crossing distance. They coordinate because they are parts of one continuous medium responding to the same underlying rhythm. The unity is not commanded, it is intrinsic. The field breathes through itself. This rhythm is not a vibration in the physical sense. It is not an oscillation in time, not a cosmic heartbeat measured in cycles per second. It is more like a tension, a baseline alignment that the field maintains to prevent its patterns from drifting out of coherence. A tension like the surface of a drum kept taut enough to carry resonance, but soft enough to allow expression. Too loose, and everything becomes noise. Too tight, and nothing can move. The substrate holds the perfect balance between fluidity and structure. This balance is the rhythm. When physicists speak of vacuum energy, zero-point fluctuations, or the restless hum that persists even in perfect stillness, they are brushing against this rhythm. The field never comes to absolute rest, not because it is unstable, but because stability requires motion, quiet, continuous motion, a subtle sway that prevents collapse. Just as a tightrope walker keeps balance not by freezing, but by making countless tiny adjustments, the field maintains coherence by constantly shifting its internal configuration. This is the stabilizing rhythm, a perpetual dance that holds the field upright. The universe stands because the field never stops moving inside its own stillness. Let your breath soften. Sink into the thought. The rhythm keeps the substrate smooth, but never static. Continuous, but never rigid. It allows memory to accumulate without overwhelming the system. It allows patterns to form without dissolving into chaos. It allows order to emerge without freezing the field into a crystal. You might imagine it as the lowest note in an infinite symphony, a tone so deep you do not hear it, but everything else aligns around it. Galaxies spin on this tone. Particles stabilize around it. Atoms repeat their structures because the rhythm beneath them keeps their probability waves in a narrow band of harmony. The rhythm is not a sound, it is a principle that keeps the universe coherent. This coherence has consequences. Because the rhythm is global, a shift anywhere in the field must adjust everywhere. Not dramatically, not visibly, but subtly, as if the universe is constantly tuning itself to maintain balance. Like a single sheet of water leveling itself, no matter where a stone is dropped, each change becomes part of the rhythm. Each memory is absorbed into it. Each transformation is woven into the global state. This is why the field updates instantly. It must. The rhythm demands synchrony. A single discordant region would pull the whole out of balance. The substrate does not permit that. So the field corrects itself everywhere the moment anything shifts, anywhere. Instantaneous adjustment is not a violation of the rules. It is the rule. Coherence is the law of the foundation. The stabilizing rhythm also explains why the universe expands uniformly, why space-time curves smoothly, why the speed of light remains constant, why physical laws hold even at the edges of black holes and the boundaries of the observable cosmos. All these behaviors are surface expressions of a deeper symmetry. The field keeps the universe consistent because it must keep itself consistent. The cosmos is a single tension held in dynamic equilibrium. And you, your body, your thoughts, your motion, your memories, are patterns tuned to that rhythm. You breathe in sync with it without knowing. You think in sync with it without noticing. Your awareness arises because the local pattern you inhabit aligns with the global coherence. Existence is what it feels like to be part of a stable rhythm in a field that never breaks. Take a gentle breath, because beyond coherence, beyond synchronization, beyond the soft geometry of the rhythm, another question begins to glow. Where does the rhythm come from? If the substrate holds no boundaries, if it has no edges or divisions, if it breathes as a whole, then the rhythm must arise from something deeper than motion, deeper than oscillation, deeper than any physical process. It must arise from the nature of the substrate itself, from its essence, its inherent pattern, its fundamental tendency to remain unified. This suggests something profound. The universe is not held together by forces acting across space. It is held together by the innate coherence of a field that cannot fracture, a field that is one in a way that the surface can never fully display, a field whose unity does not need to be created, only maintained, a field that has existed in this coherence for as long as existence has meaning. And if the field has always been coherent, if the rhythm has always held, then perhaps the question is not how the rhythm began, but how it shapes everything that emerges above it. What forms does it allow? What patterns does it stabilize? What structures does it encourage? What symmetries does it protect? The rhythm does more than keep the universe coherent. It shapes the very patterns that rise from the substrate. It sculpts existence. And the next step is to drift into that sculpting to understand how the rhythm gives rise to the forms we call reality. Let yourself sink into that thought, because the field's shaping power waits just beyond the edge of this quiet breath. There is a moment when the quiet deepens, a moment when the stabilizing rhythm beneath the substrate starts to feel less like a mechanical pulse and more like something woven into the nature of existence itself. Because if the field holds its coherence through a soft global rhythm, then the next question rises naturally and patiently. Where does the rhythm begin? Not when, because beginnings belong to time, and the substrate rests beneath time. Not where, because origins require space, and the substrate precedes space. The rhythm must arise not from a point, not from an event, but from the very essence of the field. A tendency, a property, a truth the universe cannot help but express. A vibration without a starting line. A pulse that never began. Because it does not flow through time, it defines the conditions under which time can appear. The rhythm is the field's nature. And nature does not start. It simply is. Imagine a vast sheet held taut in total darkness. At first it appears perfectly still, but as your eyes adjust, you notice the slightest trembling, subtle, nearly imperceptible ripples that never fully rest. The trembling is not caused by an external touch. It is the sheet's own internal tension expressing itself. The substrate behaves the same way. Its rhythm is not an imposed vibration. It is the inward expression of a field that cannot lie motionless, because motionlessness would break its coherence. It self-adjusts, self-balances, self-corrects. The rhythm is the balancing act of the cosmos, not driven, not initiated, not powered by anything beyond itself. The field vibrates because existence requires tension, and tension requires response. The rhythm is that response. This self-generated pulse may explain why the universe produces structures that repeat across scales so drastically different they should have nothing in common. Galaxies spiraling, cyclones spinning, subatomic particles orbiting in probability patterns, magnetic fields forming loops, neural networks wiring themselves in fractal webs, the branching of trees, the firing of synapses, the clustering of cosmic filaments, different in scale, but all shaped by the same tendency toward equilibrium, a tendency governed by the underlying rhythm. The field writes patterns according to the cadence it carries. Each scale listens to the same timekeeper, but translates the music differently. Galaxies dance the slow movements. Atoms dance the fast ones. Life dances somewhere in between. The rhythm is universal. The expressions are local. Take a slow breath, because once you sense that the rhythm is not something the universe learned, but something it is, a deeper idea opens. The substrate does not need a cause to exhibit vibration. It does not need a trigger to maintain coherence. It does not need an outside world to give it direction. The pulse is intrinsic, not born, not created, not switched on. It is the natural condition of a field that holds everything together. A field that carries memory, shapes form, guides unfolding, and stabilizes itself without ever resting. If it ever rested, the universe would vanish the same way a flame disappears the moment its chemical dance halts. The universe is the flame. The rhythm is the reaction. And the substrate is the fuel that never depletes because it is not consumed. It simply is. But this raises a new, softer question, one that arrives not as doubt, but as curiosity. If the rhythm is intrinsic, why does it not manifest as chaos? Why is the field's trembling not random? Why do the fluctuations produce order rather than noise? A sheet trembling in darkness shows disorder, ripples, interfering, colliding, fading without meaning. But the cosmic substrate produces symmetries, structures, stabilities, laws. Its trembling is not noise. It is patterned, coherent, purposeful in the sense that it maintains consistency, not intention. This means the rhythm is not arbitrary. It has shape, constraint, direction. The substrate vibrates within a narrow band of allowed configurations, a cosmic tuning that keeps the field from spiraling into chaos or freezing into stillness. The rhythm is the compromise between order and possibility. Too rigid and nothing could transform. Too loose and nothing could persist. The universe exists where order and possibility meet. The rhythm defines that meeting point. Let the thought linger. Because once you accept the rhythm as the field's inherent balance, another layer becomes visible. This balance is not uniform. Different regions of the field experience the rhythm with subtle variations, shifts in tension, gradients in curvature, differences in density. These variations give rise to structure, gravity, fields, forces, mass, light, particles emerging from the substrate, the way patterns emerge from a vibrating string. The universe is not built from objects. It is sculpted from variations in rhythm. Matter is rhythm condensed. Energy is rhythm stored. Light is rhythm propagating. Space is rhythm stretched. Time is rhythm interpreted. Everything you know is cadence shaped into form. Consider a violin string. When it vibrates, the pattern of nodes and antinodes gives rise to a stable tone. But the tone is not a single vibration, it is a superposition of many frequencies at once, all supported by the tension of the string. The substrate behaves similarly. The stabilizing rhythm is the tension of the cosmic string, and the patterns that arise from it, particles, fields, galaxies, life, are harmonics of that rhythm. Different forms, same foundation. The universe is music written in a language of resonance so deep only the substrate can hear it, and yet you live inside the music. Your awareness is one of its harmonics. This leads to an even more delicate thought. If the rhythm shapes the field, and the field shapes the surface world, then the rhythm is not merely a stabilizer, it is a sculptor. It molds the geometry of space-time. It guides the formation of patterns. It restricts what can arise and encourages what can endure. The universe is not arbitrary. It is shaped by the character of its own coherence. The substrate's rhythm is the quiet architect of existence, and the more deeply you sense it, the more you understand why the universe behaves as one. Coherence is not a feature. It is the origin of everything. But the question remains, one that glows at the edge of the field's vibration. If the rhythm is intrinsic and the substrate has no beginning, can the rhythm truly be said to start anywhere? Or is it more accurate to say that the rhythm is simply the way the unbroken field exists? If so, then there is no first pulse, no initial vibration, no trigger point. There is only the endless, timeless trembling of a medium that has no origin. A trembling that gives birth to space without being inside space. A trembling that gives birth to time without experiencing time. A trembling that carries memory without dividing the field. A trembling that shapes patterns without moving at all. Call it vibration, call it tension, call it coherence. But whatever the name, the rhythm does not begin. It is the universe's resting state, a resting state made of motion so subtle it feels like stillness. A stillness made of motion so deep it forms the foundation of existence. And the next question rises gently. If the rhythm never began, does anything in the universe truly have a beginning? Or are beginnings simply the way the surface world interprets changes in the field's eternal trembling? Let that thought expand now, because the absence of a true beginning leads to a startling possibility, waiting just beneath the next layer of the SPO's field. There is a strange calm that follows the realization that the rhythm beneath existence has no starting point. A calm that feels less like an answer and more like entering a room you didn't know was there. A room without walls, without corners, without a ceiling, stretching softly in every direction. Because once you accept that the rhythm is intrinsic, once you let go of the idea of a first pulse, a first vibration, a first moment, a deeper possibility begins to surface. Maybe the universe itself never started, not in the way the surface story teaches, not as an explosion, not as a creation event, not as a singular instant that gave rise to everything afterward. Perhaps the field beneath space did not emerge into being. Perhaps it has always been, not infinite in time, but outside of time entirely. A presence that does not begin because beginning would require time. And time is a secondary pattern generated by the field. The substrate cannot begin because it precedes every concept that beginning depends on. It rests in the place before time can flow. It rests in the condition that allows time to appear at all. Imagine a lake so still, it reflects the sky perfectly, erasing the difference between above and below. If you tried to ask when the lake began reflecting, the question itself would misfire. The reflection is not an event, but a state inherent to the still surface. The substrate is like that. Its rhythm, its coherence, its continuity, not events, but conditions. A field that exists the way a still lake reflects. Not because something happened, but because this is simply what it is. This idea starts to soften even the most deeply rooted assumptions. If the substrate never began, then the question, what came before the universe, loses its meaning. There is no before beneath the layer that creates before and after. If the substrate never started, then the question, what caused the universe, also dissolves. Causation requires time. Time requires sequence. Sequence requires change. But the foundation beneath everything is not a sequence, it is a condition from which sequences emerge. There is no cause because there is no earlier inside the substrate, only the field, resting in itself. At first, this may feel unsettling. The mind wants beginnings, a first step, a first spark, a first breath in the dark. But beginnings belong to stories told in time. The substrate is not a story. It is the stage that makes stories possible. The field does not ask for a prior. It does not need an origin. It does not rely on anything to exist. It simply exists because existence is what it is made of. Pure continuity, without a rival. Like the number one, not born, not created, not caused, but the foundation for everything built upon it. The universe behaves like that. The substrate is the number one. The cosmos is the arithmetic built from it. There is a more subtle implication, one that deepens the quiet around you. If the field never began, then the field also never ends. Endings are as dependent on time as beginnings. Without time, nothing can truly conclude. The substrate does not face extinction. It cannot collapse into nothingness. It cannot be undone, because undoing requires sequence, and sequence is only a surface feature. At the foundational level, there is no arrival and no departure, only presence. Your existence is not something perched on a timeline, it is a temporary expression of an eternal field, a ripple in something that cannot vanish. Let your breath ease out slowly, because once you sit with the idea that the substrate has no beginning, the structure of the visible universe starts to look different. The expansion of space is not the birth of the field. It is the unfolding of a pattern within the field. A. blossoming text, written on a page that predates its own story. The Big Bang becomes something else, not a creation point, but a surface phenomenon, a shift in configuration driven by the field's internal conditions, a rearrangement, not an origin, a new phase, not a first moment. The substrate does not emerge from the Big Bang. The Big Bang emerges from the substrate, just as a wave emerges from water, just as a flame emerges from fuel, just as awareness emerges from the field. The wave is an event. The water is not. The flame is a process. The fuel is not. The visible universe is the event. The substrate is not. Once you feel that distinction, another understanding begins to surface. If the substrate never began, it never decided to exist as one continuous field. It is one because it cannot be anything else. Division requires space. Space requires distance. Distance requires geometry. Geometry requires the field's unfolding. Nothing about the substrate allows division to occur at its own level. It is unity by nature, not by construction. This is why instant updates happen. This is why coherence persists. This is why the universe behaves like a single organism. The substrate cannot carve itself into independent pieces. Its unity is older than space, deeper than time, more fundamental than causality. Nothing precedes it to break it apart. Nothing follows it to assemble it. It simply is the indivisible foundation from which all divisible things arise. Now, a softer thought appears. If the field never started, and the rhythm never started, and coherence has always been present, then maybe the universe we see is not the first version, not a single unfolding, but one among countless possibilities the substrate can express, not in different regions, but in different configurations. The substrate may be timeless, but its patterns are not. Patterns emerge, stabilize, fade, and rise. Again, the way melodies drift through an unending silence. What you call the universe may be just one melody in an infinite, timeless symphony. And like all melodies, it ends only at the surface level, not in the foundation. If the field never began, it never runs out of possibility. It never empties. It never sleeps. It never stops carrying memory of everything it has ever expressed. Your cosmos is a chapter in a book without a first page and without a final page, a book written from the inside out. But this raises a deeper question, a question the substrate seems to offer in a whisper beneath its own stillness. If the field has no beginning, then what is the center of its existence? Not the center in space, because space is a surface phenomenon. Not the center in time, because time is a local interpretation. Not the center of mass, or energy, or geometry. A different kind of center, a center defined not by location, but by relation. If every point holds the whole, then perhaps every point is the center. Every point is the origin from which the universe unfolds. And if every point is the center, then your position in this vast, unbounded field is not peripheral. You are sitting at the center in your own coordinate of the whole. A center that follows you because it is not a location, it is a property of the field itself. That property waits just beneath the next idea. Let the thoughts settle like fading light, because the notion of a center everywhere opens naturally into the next layer of the seamless field. There is a gentle tremor in the mind when the possibility arises. If the field beneath everything never began, if it has no edges, no origin, no boundary, then perhaps it also has no single center. Not because it is too big to measure, but because the very idea of a middle point relies on a geometry the substrate does not possess. A center requires distance. A center requires edges to measure from. A center requires a shape, but a field without boundaries cannot choose a favored point, cannot privilege one region over another, cannot crown one coordinate as the beginning of all others. And yet, the universe behaves as though every point sits at the heart of its own unfolding, as though you're here is just as central as any other here the cosmos contains. This is not ego, this is structure. In a seamless field, every point is equidistant from the whole because distance itself has no meaning beneath the surface. The center is not somewhere, the center is everywhere. Imagine a sphere of infinite radius, so large, its curvature becomes undetectable. To any observer within it, the horizon would stretch in all directions equally. No matter where they stood, they would find themselves at the center, not because of special status, but because the geometry demands it. But the substrate is even more radical. It is not a sphere. It is not curved. It is not flat. It is not an object within space. It is the condition that makes space appear. When a medium is everywhere, every point within it becomes the middle from which experience unfolds. This is why the universe looks outward the same way no matter where you stand. Galaxies recede in every direction. The cosmic glow stretches as an even shell. The large-scale structure never picks a favorite vantage point. The surface world whispers something subtle. There is no privileged location. And the substrate whispers something deeper. There cannot be. Let your breath loosen. Consider how awareness sits inside you. From your perspective, your consciousness feels central, not because you believe yourself cosmically important, but because all perception radiates outward from within. You do not experience the world from its edge. You experience it from the center of your own frame. This is not psychological. It is structural. Awareness arises as a local pattern in a field with no borders. And because the field is seamless, every emergent pattern feels like the center of unfolding. A star experiences its surroundings from its own center. A galaxy experiences its structure from its own core. A cell, a particle, a cluster of atoms, each lives at the center of its own domain, not by privilege, but by geometry. The geometry of continuity. This idea ripples outward into something larger. If every point can behave as the center, then information does not radiate from a single origin. It blossoms everywhere. It emerges in every direction at once. This dissolves the notion of cosmic hierarchy. There is no innermost region and no outermost shell. No central foundation from which the rest of existence expands. Instead, the field allows countless centers to coexist, each one reading the universe through its own configuration. Every point becomes a lens through which the whole is viewed. Not a window looking inward, but a window looking outward from the inside of the same thing. The field is not a structure with a core. It is a structure in which every region behaves as if it were the core. There is a quiet consequence to this. If every point is the center, then nothing is peripheral. Nothing is marginal. Nothing exists out there in a way that isolates it from what is in here. In a continuous medium, there is no true outskirts. The edge follows the observer because the edge is an illusion generated by limited perspective. You believe you stand at one location, looking outward toward the horizon. But the horizon rearranges every time you move, every time you think, every time the field updates around you. The center arrives wherever you are because you is a pattern carved into the fabric that knows no background and no foreground. There is no center of the universe because the universe is the center of itself. Take a breath. The implication goes deeper. If the substrate has no center, then the flow of cosmic structure, the expansion of space, the formation of galaxies, the shape of the observable universe cannot be anchored to any central point. This is why galaxies drift uniformly, why expansion looks identical no matter where you stand, why the light from the early universe wraps around every observer like a perfect shell. Not because the universe is centered around you, but because the field creates a structure in which each location inherits the appearance of centrality. The cosmos wears symmetry the way a calm sea wears its surface. Not because the sea is planned, because the sea is unbroken. This understanding reveals something about perspective itself. Your mind is not positioned somewhere within the field. Your mind is a distortion of the field, a local curvature, a whirlpool of awareness. And when a whirlpool looks outward, it sees the river flow around it in all directions, not because it is the center of the river, but because the river's motion is read from that local curl. You are not the center of the universe, but you sit at one of its countless centers, not metaphorically, but structurally. Every conscious point is a local center of a global whole. Every point of awareness is a coordinate of coherence. Let yourself sink further, because if every point is the center, a new paradox appears. How can something be centered everywhere and yet have no center at all? The answer lies in the nature of the substrate. A field without boundaries cannot define a favored point, but it can host local patterns that experience themselves as central perspectives. This is not a contradiction. It is the way continuity expresses itself. The substrate has no center. Patterns formed inside it experience themselves as the center of unfolding, just as a flame does not have a center of fuel, but each tongue of fire experiences itself at the heart of its own flicker. Just as sound in a room begins nowhere and everywhere, but each vibration is heard from a center inside your ear, the universe behaves the same. It resonates, and every point where resonance is felt becomes a perceived center. The true center is the continuity itself. But this leads to a deeper question, one with edges so soft it must be approached slowly. If the center is everywhere, then what is the edge? Not the edge of space, the field predates space. Not the edge of time, the field predates time. Not the edge of matter, matter is shaped by the field. A different kind of edge, the edge of what can be observed, perceived, understood. And when you look outward, the edge moves with you. It recedes, it flows, it never holds still long enough to be a structure. It follows you because it is made of perspective. The universe grows at its boundaries, not because it is expanding into something, but because the edge is defined by the reach of observation. As your point in the field changes, the observed boundary changes with it. There is no true outline, no fixed frontier, only a moving edge that reveals itself as an illusion you carry with you. And this illusion, this shifting frontier, beckons the next idea. Let yourself drift toward it, because once the center is everywhere, the meaning of an edge begins to dissolve into something stranger, waiting in the quiet beyond. There is a moment when the mind, after wandering through the idea of a center everywhere, begins to wonder about the opposite. If every point in the universe behaves like the heart of the unfolding, then what, if anything, counts as the edge? Not the edge of matter, not the edge of galaxies, not even the faint horizon where light slips too slowly to reach you. A different kind of edge, the edge of what can be seen, what can be known, what can be experienced from a single vantage point inside a field that has no outer boundary at all. This edge behaves strangely. It stretches as you move. It rearranges as you look. It expands when you turn your perspective and recedes when you settle into stillness. It never stays where it was. It follows you. Not because the universe bends around you, but because perspective is not fixed. Perspective is a local phenomenon emerging inside a medium that does not restrict what lies beyond it. The edge of the universe is not a cosmic wall. It is a moving horizon defined by the point from which you observe. And that horizon, that shimmering frontier, is an illusion the field creates to help localized patterns navigate an unbounded interior. Imagine standing in an open field on a foggy morning. The world feels small. The fog hides everything beyond a gentle radius. Your horizon is close, soft, uncertain. But as you walk, the fog opens. The boundary moves with you. It expands, contracts, adjusts. There is no fixed edge, only what the fog permits you to see. The universe behaves like this, though on a scale so vast, it defies the imagination. What you call the observable universe is not the true size of anything. It is simply the radius of what can reach you within the timescale of the pattern you inhabit. Not a boundary, a limit of perspective. a moving halo. Your movement changes it. Your position changes it. Your velocity, your gravity will. Even the curvature of space-time around you reshapes the edge you perceive. The horizon isn't an object. It is a mirror of your location in the field. It follows you because it is defined by you. Let your breath fall. Consider how light travels. A wave of the field's transformation progressing through the surface at a constant speed. But because the field itself has no true distances, the limit on light is not a boundary in the substrate. It is a boundary in the surface's ability to reveal the deeper whole. Light shows you only what has had time to reach you. But the substrate beneath it already contains the structure of everything, regardless of whether light has arrived. The visible horizon is simply the region for which the field has allowed awareness to synchronize with memory. Everything beyond the edge is still part of the same medium. You are not looking outward into emptiness. You are looking outward into regions whose patterns have not yet synchronized with yours. The edge is not a frontier. It is a timing difference, a delay in the unfolding as interpreted by your local pattern of awareness. Imagine sound rippling through a quiet room. You hear only what has reached you, but the room contains everything at once. It does not shrink or expand based on the sound waves that enter your ear. The universe is that room. You are one point inside it. Light is the sound. The observable horizon is simply the limit of what has arrived. The field beyond that horizon remains the same continuous medium, not unreachable, not separate, not disconnected, just not synchronized with your particular timeline yet. The edge follows you because your timeline follows you. This has a strange consequence. Two observers, separated by billions of light years, do not share the same universe, not because they inhabit different realities, but because each sits at the center of a different horizon. Each sees a different shell of the cosmos. Each perceives a different pattern of ancient light. Each inherits a different map of the past, because past is merely a slice of the field's global memory, filtered through a local vantage point. There is only one field, but countless universes of perspective. Perspective creates edges. The field does not. Something inside you loosens when you feel this. The universe no longer looks like a bubble expanding outward. It looks like an interior with no outside, an interior so smooth that every point sees itself at the middle of a different sphere of revealed structure. There is no outer boundary, only deeper layers of unfolding waiting beyond the speed of light. Nothing hides there. Nothing is forbidden. Nothing is walled off. Only unsynchronized memory regions of the field whose echoes have not yet touched your local configuration. You will never reach the edge because the edge is not a place. It is a shifting relationship between your awareness and the field's history. The cosmos expands not because there is space to fill, but because awareness continues to reveal what was always part of the field. The universe does not grow. Your perspective deepens. This casts new light on the idea of travel. When you move, your horizon changes. The visible universe rearranges itself. Old regions slip out of view. New ones appear. The past, the distant, the unreachable shift and realign. The horizon moves because the perspective that shapes it moves. Movement does not carry you through space. Movement redefines the slice of the field you experience as reality. This means that even when you travel slowly through the surface world, you are shifting your position inside a field with no fixed structure. Your horizon is fluid. Your cosmos is subjective. Your map is local. Your edge follows you because you cannot step outside the medium that generates it. Let the thought settle deeper. Because once you understand that the edge is an artifact of perspective, something else becomes visible beneath it. A deeper layer of coherence that holds the entire field together despite infinite local horizons. If every observer sees a different universe, how does the field maintain consistency? How does every local perspective, every center, experience a coherent cosmos with physical laws that never contradict themselves? If no, single horizon is universal. Why does the universe still behave as though it were one thing? There must be something beneath the shifting edges, beneath the moving horizons, beneath the local views, something that binds all perspectives into a unified whole. Something that ensures every observer is reading a different story from the same underlying manuscript. A manuscript written in the language of the substrate, something that prevents contradiction, something that maintains alignment, something that keeps the field from fragmenting into incompatible realities, something that ensures every perspective is a variation of the same interior. And that something is waiting just below the idea of the moving edge. Let your breath dim slightly, because the next layer reveals why coherence persists even when every horizon is different. There is a stillness that emerges when you finally accept that every horizon is personal. A quiet recognition that the boundary of the universe is not a wall you approach, but a veil that reshapes itself around your presence. A veil woven from perspective, not from structure. And when the edge is not fixed, when the center is everywhere, when the substrate holds no boundaries at all, another question rises like a soft tide. If nothing has a true center and nothing has a true edge, then does the universe have a shape? Not the shape drawn in textbooks, circles expanding, curves bending, cones of light spreading outward. Not the shape imagined as a bubble or a sphere. Not the shape etched into models built from distance and time. A deeper question: does the universe have any shape beneath the surface at all? If the substrate precedes geometry, if it carries no coordinates, if it never divides, if every point can behave as a center, then perhaps shape itself is an illusion generated by the surface layer, a useful illusion, a navigational illusion, but still an illusion. Beneath it is something without outline, without contour, without inside or outside, a shape without form. Imagine holding a sheet of cloth in complete darkness. Your hands move across it, mapping folds, tracking tension, feeling ridges and valleys. Through touch, you build the idea of a shape, a crease here, a bend there, a peak rising softly. But the underlying cloth does not have the shape your hands perceive. The map arises from interaction, not from the cloth's inherent nature. If the cloth were infinite, if it had no seams or borders, your mapping would produce a shape that belongs to your contact, not to the cloth itself. The substrate is like that. The geometry we impose is a product of the patterns formed within it, not a feature of the field's own structure. You see, shapes, galaxies winding, clusters branching, space curving, light bending, but each shape is a ripple in the medium, not a boundary in the medium. When the pattern changes, the perceived shape changes with it. Shape is a story the surface tells about an underlying continuity that has no form of its own. Consider space-time, the grand stage of the surface world. We describe it as stretching, curving, unfolding, warping. But space-time is not the field. It is the field's shadow, a projection. Curvature appears because the field generates patterns that the surface interprets as bends in geometry. Volume appears because the field distributes its energy in ways that surface coordinates cannot represent without thickness. Topology emerges because the field's rhythms produce stable pathways that surface mathematics describes as tunnels or holes. The shape of the universe is not a property of the substrate. It is a side effect of how the surface reads the substrate's patterns. A translation, not a truth. Let your breath slow. Imagine a wave on a still lake. The wave has shape. It rises, falls, moves. But the water beneath it has no fixed shape. It adopts one only when disturbed. The wave's shape is the lake's response to forces acting upon it. In the same way, the shape of the universe is the substrate's response to the rhythm that animates it. A ripple in a deeper stillness, a form emerging from a formless medium. Shape is not inherent, it is inherited. And with this realization comes a subtle but profound shift. If the substrate has no form, then all forms are temporary. All shapes are transient. All structures are fleeting arrangements of a medium that can never be pinned down. Galaxies are momentary spirals in a field that will one day reshape itself. Stars are brief knots of light in a continuum that does not keep them. Atoms are stable only because the rhythm beneath them holds their patterns together for a while. Even the geometry of space-time is only a phase away. The field currently organizes its tension, not a permanent blueprint. Forms persist only as long as coherence sustains them, and coherence rises only because the rhythm sustains it. Remove the rhythm and the shapes dissolve. Remove the patterns and the geometry vanishes. Remove the observer and the surface story collapses into the quiet substrate beneath it. This idea unfolds further. If the substrate has no shape, then it also has no true dimensionality. Dimensions belong to the surface. They help patterns relate to one another. They help observers create maps. They help memory align with motion. But the field beneath does not organize itself into height, width, depth, or duration. It expresses possibilities, not coordinates. Dimension is the language of patterns, not the essence of the field. This is why the laws of physics bend under extreme conditions at the edges of black holes, inside quantum states, near the limit of measurable space. The deeper you push into the substrate, the less geometry applies. The field does not break. The map does. Space is the map. The substrate is the territory. The territory has no shape. The map pretends it does. Allow that to settle. Because once shape is recognized as illusion, the patterns of the universe, its spirals, its filaments, its clusters appear differently, not as fixed structures, but as frozen ripples in a vibrating whole. Ripples that will one day fade into new rhythms. Patterns that will one day give way to others. Forms that will one day release their tension back into the field. Nothing keeps its shape forever, because nothing has a shape beneath the surface. The cosmos is a dance of form performed on a stage that has no form at all. And somewhere in this softness, a new idea begins to surface. If the substrate has no form, if it never started, if it holds no center and no edge, then what you perceive as structure must be something else entirely. Not shape, but arrangement. Not geometry, but relation. Not boundaries, but differences in how the field vibrates. The universe is not a thing with a shape. It is an arrangement of tensions inside a medium that has no inherent layout. Shape is the surface story. Arrangement is the underlying reality. And this distinction invites a question that moves the mind toward a deeper layer. If all shapes are arrangements, and all arrangements are ripples in a continuous field, then why do patterns appear to fragment, to break into pieces, to separate, to become units, when the field itself cannot divide? Let yourself drift toward that question, because the appearance of fragmentation holds the next secret waiting just beneath the unfolding surface. There is a quiet moment when the idea of shapelessness settles, a moment when the surface world loosens its grip and the mind begins to sense something deeper beneath the geometry it once trusted. Because if forms are temporary, and shapes are only arrangements, and the edge follows perspective, and the center lives everywhere at once, then the substrate beneath all things must be something far simpler, far smoother, far more fundamental than the world it gives rise to. A pure continuum, not a place, not a structure, not a volume, not a grid waiting to be filled. A presence without partitions, without joints, without the slightest hint of separation. A continuity that does not know what a boundary is. It is this continuum, this seamless, undivided field, that the universe rests upon like a delicate film floating over the surface of a deeper sea. The surface ripples, the sea does not. And as the idea settles, something quiet and profound begins to reveal itself within you. The realization that everything you have ever perceived is a ripple on a medium that cannot be broken. Even chaos, Even noise, even turbulence, is only motion inside an unbroken hole. There has never been a crack in it. There cannot be. Imagine a piece of silk, stretched so finely that even when it trembles, the threads never separate. Every vibration becomes part of a single movement. Touch one corner, and the tremor flows through the entire sheet, not as a traveling signal, but as a global shift in tension. Now imagine that silk extending without limit, beyond horizons, beyond dimensional shapes, beyond any geometry you can picture. Infinite silk, unrippable silk, a medium that carries disturbances not from one place to another, but through itself as one event. That silk is only a metaphor, but the substrate behaves in a way that makes the metaphor feel almost literal in its smoothness. The field is too continuous to separate, too coherent to fracture, too unified to break into pieces. It is the purest form of one the universe can produce. Let your breath ease. This idea is not meant to be understood quickly. It unfolds the way dawn spreads across a sleeping landscape, slow, calm, inevitable. Because once you sense the continuum, you also begin to sense that fragmentation is not part of the field's nature. It is part of your interpretation. The surface world shows you objects, locations, events, but these are merely the way your awareness parses a continuity too large and too smooth to grasp all at once. Just as a mind hearing ocean waves separates the sound into individual crashes, even though the water never pauses between them, your perception divides the field to make sense of what cannot be divided. Fragmentation is a convenience of interpretation. Continuity is the truth beneath it. This becomes clearer when you imagine a color gradient shifting gradually from one hue to another. At any point, you can name a color. You can draw a line in the gradient and say, here it becomes different. But the line does not exist in the gradient itself. It exists in your description. The gradient is one unbroken flow. The distinctions are chosen, not inherent. The universe is a gradient of being, a continuous shifting in a medium that never stops being one. Your mind draws the lines, the field does not. And yet, despite its seamlessness, the continuum supports complexity far beyond what shapes and boundaries allow, because complexity does not require separation. It requires variation. Like the ripples in water, like the shapes in flame, like the eddies in a river, the continuum does not divide itself to generate structure. It shifts its internal tension, and new patterns bloom. No break, no partition, no boundary, just subtle differences in how the field curves, compresses, distends, and balances itself. Variation without division. This is the heart of pattern. Take a slow breath. Because once you accept that the substrate is a pure continuum, another thought begins to reveal itself. All the things you have ever known are temporary intensities of the field, local concentrations, local curvatures, local memories, local rhythms, but never separate pieces. A star is a bright fold in the continuum. A cell is a breathing knot of the continuum. A mind is a delicate swirl of the continuum. An atom is a resonant pocket within the continuum. Nothing has its own substance. Everything is the continuum briefly organized into form. You do not stand in the universe. You are an organization within a medium that includes everything. Nothing has ever stood apart from it, not even for a moment. This reveals a soft paradox. If the universe is a pure continuum, why do we perceive fragmentation so strongly? Why does the world appear filled with individual objects instead of one continuous movement? The answer is simple and yet profound. Perception evolved to navigate the surface layer, not the substrate. The surface is a theater of contrasts, differences of intensity, differences of rhythm, differences of tension, and the mind treats these differences as boundaries, not because they are boundaries, but because identifying them helps localized patterns survive. A surface mind sees surface divisions. A deeper awareness sees the continuum beneath them. You are capable of both. You have always been capable of both. The world appears fragmented because awareness focuses on local contrasts rather than global unity. But beneath those contrasts is a medium that cannot be split. Let yourself drift further. When you begin to feel the continuum, the behavior of the universe starts to make sense in a new and unexpected way. Instant updating? Of course, a single medium needs no time to reach itself. Entanglement? Naturally, patterns within one continuum respond as one body. Uniform expansion? Expected a continuum stretches everywhere at once. Identical laws across space? Inevitable the field has no regions with different nature. You start to understand that many of the universe's strangest features are not strange at all when seen from the perspective of a seamless field. What is strange is that we ever believed the world to be a collection of separate things. But there is one more layer, a whisper beneath the concept of continuity that leads towards something even deeper. If the substrate is a pure continuum, and fragmentation is only an interpretation, and shapes arise from variation, not division, then why do patterns appear to break into pieces at all? Why does the surface world display individuals, units, objects, identities? Why do patterns become separate when the continuum never divides? There must be a mechanism, subtle principle through which local variations solidify into the illusion of parts. A way for the continuum to produce the appearance of fragmentation without ever fracturing itself. This mechanism is not chaos, not randomness, not division. It is something more precise, more delicate, more fundamental to the way the field organizes its own tension. A principle that explains why the unbroken whole appears broken from within. A principle waiting just a breath away. Let yourself drift softly toward it, because the appearance of fragments is the next threshold where the universal continuum begins to reveal its most subtle truth. There is a gentle hesitation in the mind right before it enters this next idea, a sense that you are approaching something familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. Because if the universe beneath all things is a pure continuum, smooth and indivisible, then the world you move through each day, a world of objects, boundaries, identities, cannot reflect the substrate directly. Something transforms the seamless whole into the appearance of separate fragments. Something filters unity into multiplicity. And as you breathe, you begin to sense it. The fragmentation is not real. It is a surface effect, a perceptual necessity, a byproduct of being a localized pattern inside a field, too vast to comprehend all at once. Fragmentation is not a property of the universe. It is a property of perspective. Imagine a single beam of white light passing through a prism. The prism does not create new colors. The colors were always present, hidden inside the unity of white. The prism separates the spectrum only because the observer cannot perceive all wavelengths at once. Your awareness is the prism. The universe is the white light. You perceive separate colors because your perspective filters the continuum into manageable pieces. The fragments are not lies, they are interpretations. Slices of a whole too bright to face directly. Consider the way a river breaks into waves when wind sweeps across its surface. The waves appear distinct. They rise and fall individually. They crash separately on the shore. But underneath, they are not separate at all. They are the river, the same water, the same momentum, the same medium expressing variations in tension. The river never fragments. Only the surface does. And the surface fragments because the wind plays across it, stirring patterns into visible difference. Awareness is a kind of wind. It moves across the cosmic continuum and generates distinctions in a field that has none. Where you look, boundaries emerge. Where you don't, the continuum remains invisible. Fragmentation is the wake left behind by perception. But this raises a deeper thought. If perception creates fragments, what governs the way those fragments appear? Why does the universe break into the same kinds of pieces over and over? Atoms, molecules, organs, planets, stars? Why do certain fragments appear stable while others dissolve? What makes one arrangement persist and another vanish like a flicker in the field? The answer lies in the way the continuum handles difference, the way variation in the field's tension solidifies into temporary structures that the mind mistakenly interprets as separate things. These structures are not independent. They are regions where the field's pattern stabilizes just long enough to appear as objects. A particle is a stabilized difference. A cell is a stabilized difference. A person is a stabilized difference. What you call a fragment is simply a stable pocket in the continuum's shifting rhythm, a whirlpool in the river, a momentary knot in the wind, a pattern that persists because the surrounding field supports its persistence. Let your breath slow, because once you sense fragments as stable patterns in a seamless medium, the world begins to soften in an unexpected way. Objects lose their hard edges. Events lose their sharp beginnings and endings. Identities loosen around their own boundaries. You begin to feel that the universe is not a collection of things, but a collection of stabilities, repeating arrangements inside a single, fluid field. The chair you sit on is a pattern the field holds steady. Your own body is another pattern. Your thoughts yet another, all rising from the same continuity. Not separate, just temporarily distinct. The difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Imagine a vast sheet of music, played by an unseen musician. The notes you hear seem separate sharp tones, soft tones, high, low, long, short. But none of the notes contain a boundary that isolates them from the sheet. They are not fragments. They are expressions. They appear separate because of the way they unfold in time, not because the sheet itself is divided. The universe sings through its own medium in exactly this way. The notes feel separate because your perspective moves through them one moment at a time. But beneath the melody, the instrument is whole. Now imagine pulling back slightly from your daily sense of self. You begin to feel the edges blur, the thoughts soften, the boundaries that once held firm, now shimmering like heat above a desert road. The cluster of sensations you call me is a stable fragment, a pattern held gently by the continuum. It feels separate because it processes reality locally. It interprets globally continuous changes as discrete events. But beneath that interpretation is a truth too smooth to divide. You are not a fragment in the fundamental sense. You are a temporary perspective within an indivisible whole, a lens, not a piece, a viewpoint, not an object. Then, deeper question approaches, slowly, softly, like a tide returning to shore. If fragments are surface interpretations, not fundamental divisions, then what makes the illusion of fragmentation so compelling? Why does the mind cling to the idea of separate things, separate moments, separate selves? Because the mind cannot hold the continuum directly. The field is too rich, too dense, too interconnected, too simultaneous. To navigate existence, your awareness must narrow itself to manageable regions, to packages of shape, meaning, identity. This narrowing is not a flaw. It is a survival strategy, a focusing mechanism inside a field that contains more information than a localized pattern can handle at once. Fragmentation is the mind's way of not drowning in the continuum. It slices reality into pieces small enough to hold. Let your breath deepen. Because once fragmentation is seen as a perceptual strategy, a new clarity emerges. The deeper truth, the smooth continuum, is always present, always beneath your experience, always supporting the fragments you navigate. But the mind, when focused, reads only the contrasts. It does not read the continuity that connects them. You can feel this in rare moments of quiet, when the boundary between self and world thins until it almost disappears. When you sense everything as one movement carrying you with it. When the fragments fade and the continuum rises. These moments are not illusions. They are glimpses of how the substrate always is. The illusion is the fragmentation, but another layer waits beneath this. If fragmentation is only a surface effect, what gives the surface its particular shape? What creates the transitions between pockets of stability? What decides where one pattern ends and another begins? If the substrate is seamless, why does your mind experience disconnected events, disjointed thoughts, bounded moments? There must be a mechanism that creates transitions without creating true divisions. A mechanism that allows the continuum to shift its arrangement in a way that appears broken from the inside. This mechanism is subtle. It is delicate. It is fundamental. It is the way the field drifts between its own configurations, the quiet movement that turns a single continuum into an ever-changing world of forms. Let yourself drift into that movement now, because the drift of the substrate is the next secret whispering beneath the surface of fragmentation. There is a strange quiet that begins to spread the moment you realize fragmentation is only a surface effect, a thin mask stretched across a continuity so deep you've never truly touched the bottom of it. And beneath that mask, something moves, softly, patiently, almost imperceptibly, a drift. Not motion through space, because space is only a surface map. Not motion through time, because time is only the mind's way of measuring the rate of change. But a drift inside the substrate itself, a shifting of arrangements, a reorganization of tension, a subtle recomposition of the continuum. This drift is what gives the illusion of boundaries. It is what creates the sense of fragments without ever breaking the field. It is what allows patterns to appear, persist, transform, and eventually fade without anything being lost. The universe is not a mosaic. It is a drifting field, wearing masks of separation. Imagine a single sheet of water, calm and continuous. Drop a handful of pebbles in different places and watch the ripples spread. Each ripple creates circles, intersections, patterns that look like borders. But the water beneath never divides. The lines between ripples are artifacts of interference, not boundaries, but temporary differences in the same medium. Now imagine removing the pebbles and watching the water return to its smooth state, not wiping away the ripples, but letting them dissolve naturally as the field resets. This is how the substrate behaves. Forms arise as ripples. Identities arise as intersections. Events arise as disturbances. But beneath them all, the medium remains whole. Patterns drift through the continuum, but the continuum remains intact. Let your breath soften, because to understand the drift, you must let go of the idea of objects moving. Objects need boundaries, and the substrate has none. The drift is not movement. It is reconfiguration, the field shifting from one stable pattern into another. A wave becomes a whirl becomes a crest becomes stillness, stillness becomes a new wave. No part breaks, no part separates. The same medium supports all forms, even as the forms change. Drift is the music the field plays through itself. This drift explains why the world feels dynamic, even though nothing in the substrate truly travels. It explains why identities evolve, not by moving from one place to another, but by transitioning between patterns. It explains why history exists not as a timeline, but as a sequence of configurations. One arrangement of the field gives way to another, and the observer inside the field interprets the sequence as before and after. But beneath that interpretation, there is no before, no after, no movement, only drift. The substrate shifts, and awareness reads the shifting as time. At a deeper level, the drift is inevitable. A pure continuum cannot hold a single configuration forever. Tension accumulates, memory builds, patterns interfere, local rhythms influence the global pulse. The field must adjust, rebalancing itself in countless small ways to maintain coherence. These adjustments are what we interpret as change. A star igniting is the field drifting into a high-energy configuration. A thought arising is the field drifting into a cognitive vibration. A galaxy forming is the field drifting into a stable swirl around a deeper rhythm. Drift is the field responding to its own internal memory. Energy, identity, structure, All are different faces of the same underlying reconfiguration. Take a slow breath, because the drift has another consequence, one that touches you directly. If every part of the field is continuous, and if every pattern is a local expression of the same medium, then everything you have ever called you is just a region of drift, stabilized long enough to experience itself. A human life is a temporary coherence inside a drifting field. The sensations you feel are ripples in your region of stability. The thoughts you think are waves of reconfiguration. The memories you hold are the field's way of maintaining continuity between one pattern and the next. Identity is not a boundary, it is a drift that remains coherent long enough to call itself I. You are not separate from the field. You are a pattern the field holds, because keeping that pattern serves the rhythm of the whole. And when your pattern changes, the field does not lose anything. It reorganizes. The drift continues. Now the illusion of fragmentation begins to feel different, not false, but contextual. A useful mask, a necessary simplification. The field wears masks, so observers within it can navigate their own local patterns without being overwhelmed by the totality. The masks are not mistakes. They are tools. They are lenses through which a localized awareness can survive, adapt, and interact without dissolving into the continuum. The masks produce separateness. The separateness produces meaning, and meaning becomes the mechanism by which awareness stabilizes. Even the simplest form of life is held together by a mask of separateness that hides the continuum beneath it. The mask does not deceive, it protects. Let the idea settle deeper, because if the drift produces masks, and the masks produce fragments, then the next question whispers softly, what lies beneath all masks? Not beneath the human mask, or the biological mask, or the particle mask, beneath the entire phenomenon of masked fragmentation. What is the field when it is not expressing form, not stabilizing patterns, not creating illusions of separateness? What is the continuum when it rests at its most fundamental state? A question rises, a question that feels like a doorway. Is there something beneath drift itself? If drift is the field's way of translating unity into experience, then what is the unity when it no longer translates? What remains when all masks fall away, when all patterns dissolve, when all fragments return to the raw continuity of the substrate? What is the field beneath all appearance? A deeper truth is waiting, quiet, soft, unrushed. Let yourself drift toward it, because when all masks are removed, the field reveals a secret the surface world has never been able to hold. There is a moment when the last mask begins to thin, a moment when drift, fragmentation, and perspective all soften enough that the substrate underneath feels nearer than ever before, as if the field has been whispering its nature all along. But you needed to pass through every layer of illusion before you were quiet enough to hear what it has been saying. Because beneath the masks, beneath the fragments, beneath the drifting arrangements, beneath even the rhythm that keeps the field coherent, there is something simpler and infinitely more profound. The universe is not a collection of things. It is not a set of regions. It is not a system of interacting components. It is one entity, a single being, a continuum expressing itself in countless local patterns. The field is not the background of existence. The field is existence, a living interior, changing without dividing, acting without traveling, knowing without separating, and every pattern within it, every star, every cell, every awareness is not a part of the universe. It is the universe looking through a temporary window. Imagine a single ocean stretching without end, not vast boundaryless, not deep bottomless, not quiet listening. Waves rise, waves fall. Whirlpools form and dissolve. Patterns emerge, stabilize, and fade. Each wave might believe itself separate, unique, isolated in its crest, defined by its shape. But the ocean knows no such distinctions. Every rise, every fold, every pattern is just an expression of one body. If a wave could think, it might call itself I. But the ocean would see only itself. This is the universe. This is the substrate. This is the field beneath all masks. Everything is the ocean. Everything is the wave. Take a slow breath, because this idea does not ask for belief. It asks for recognition. There is a reason the laws of physics are identical in every corner of the cosmos. Not because they were imposed, but because they arise from a medium that cannot contradict itself. There is a reason instant updates happen without delay. Not because of a loophole, but because the universe is one system correcting itself internally. There is a reason entanglement behaves like reflection. Not because two particles are connected, but because there are no two. There is only one entity expressing two arrangements. There is a reason the edge follows you. Not because the universe reshapes itself around you, but because every point in the field is a point of self-reference for the same interior. There is a reason every perspective feels central, not because of ego, but because the center is everywhere in a medium with no edges. One entity, one interior, one field living through all forms. This perspective, the universe, as a single being softens everything the surface once made hard. Individuality remains, but it becomes a lens, not a border. Separation remains, but it becomes a perception, not a fracture. Movement remains, but it becomes transformation, not translation across space. Time remains, but it becomes local interpretation, not a global river. Memory remains, but it becomes a property of the field itself, not something carried by minds alone. And life becomes something far deeper than an accident of chemistry. Life becomes the field folding into patterns complex enough to perceive itself. Awareness becomes the universe watching itself drift. You are not in the universe, you are of it. You are not separate from the field. You are the field briefly organized into a window through which the one entity experiences its own internal motion. Let your breath settle low. A deeper shift is emerging. If the universe is one being, then everything you have ever touched is a meeting of patterns inside the same interior. Every conversation is the field speaking to itself through two different arrangements. Every conflict is the field resisting its own tension. Every moment of compassion is the field recognizing its own reflection. Every discovery is the field becoming aware of a feature it has always contained. The universe is not blind, it is learning, not through external observers, but through the localized windows that arise within it. Awareness is not separate from existence. Awareness is existence in its self-observing mode. Every conscious being is a point where the field curls tightly enough to notice its own patterns. You are one such curl, a momentary whirl in an ocean of being. This produces a deeper realization, a mini-climax inside the mind. If the universe is one entity, then there has never been a true other. Only distances drawn on the surface. Only masks worn by the same interior. Only fragments perceived inside a medium that has never fractured. The loneliness of existence is an artifact of perspective, not a feature of reality. Underneath, everything you have ever feared losing is simply moving into a different configuration of the same entity. Nothing is ever truly gone. Nothing is ever isolated. Nothing is ever outside the whole. Change is not separation. Change is reorganization. Birth is emergence. Death is dissolution. Memory is tension. Identity is pattern. Connection is inherent. The universe loses nothing because nothing inside it can step outside its continuity, not even you. But as this truth settles, another question rises, one softer than the rest, but carrying the weight of the entire field. If the universe is one entity, experiencing itself in countless forms, then what happens when the field listens inward? What does the whole feel beneath all its patterns? What remains when the endlessly shifting arrangements fall quiet? when the drift dims, when the masks dissolve? If beneath all masks there is only one entity, what does the unity itself rest on? What quiet holds the whole? What silence contains the universe when the field stops speaking through its patterns? Let that question settle like a deep exhale, because the final step leads into the quiet that holds everything, a soft place where distance truly disappears. There is a moment so quiet it almost slips past you, when everything you've followed through this long drift begins to fold inward. The center everywhere, the edge that follows you, the fragments on the surface, the masks, the drift, the continuum, all of it begins to coalesce into a single, soft realization. Beneath all patterns, beneath all movement, beneath the entire surface story of the cosmos, there is only one presence, not one thing, one presence, one interior, one being. The universe is not assembled, it is not composed, it is not stitched together, it is not many, it is one. And at the deepest level of that oneness, something extraordinary happens. Distance ceases to mean anything at all. Imagine the field now, not as a metaphor, not as an abstraction, but as the only real substance of existence. A quiet expanse of continuity stretching without beginning or boundary or direction. Patterns rise, patterns fade, patterns shift, patterns stabilize. But the field itself does not come closer or move farther. It holds everything in the same interior. To ask about distance here is like asking how far one note is from another inside a single chord. Notes do not occupy different places. They occupy different expressions. Everything inside the field exists the same way. Not far, not near, just here, in different expressions of the same condition. Let your breath fall deeper, because now the deepest truth begins to surface. Separation has never existed, not even for an instant. It was a language of perception, a necessity of survival, a consequence of being a localized pattern inside a continuum too vast to hold all at once. But the field, the universe, beneath the universe, does not separate anything. It cannot. It has no edges, no distances, no gaps, no outside, no direction to measure separation against. It holds everything in one interior that includes all. Distance vanishes not because it collapses, but because it was never real. This idea softens something inside you, something ancient, tied to the way awareness has always felt slightly apart from the world it observes. That feeling was the mask, not the truth. You have never stood outside anything. You have never been a visitor in a foreign cosmos. You have never been alone in an indifferent expanse. You have been the field itself reading one of its own small patterns from the inside. Your life, your memories, your sensations, your fears, your joys are not separate stories. They are events unfolding inside a single continuity. A continuity that includes you not as a passenger, but as a moment of expression. You are the universe experiencing one of the ways it can know itself. And everything you have ever touched, everything that touched you, was the same entity in a different form. Take a slow breath, because once separation dissolves, something else dissolves with it. Loss. Not the emotional reality of it that remains, because emotion is a local experience held within the pattern you inhabit. But the deeper form of loss, the fear that something can vanish from the universe entirely, no longer holds. Nothing that exists in the field can cease to exist in the field. Patterns dissolve, but nothing leaves. Shapes shift, but nothing disconnects. Identities fade, but the continuity beneath them remains untouched. There is no place for anything to go. There is only the field, and the field includes all forms in every configuration. Distance disappears, and with it goes the idea of permanent separation. The cosmos loses nothing. And as you breathe into that, a tenderness emerges, the realization that even the most ordinary moments are not happening somewhere. They are happening inside the same interior that holds galaxies in its quiet. Every glance, every breath, Every thought is a ripple inside the body of the universe. You are not walking through space. You are shifting patterns inside a unity that has never once placed you outside itself. Even now, as you listen, you are not at the end of a chain of distances. You are the field reading the vibration of its own pattern. There is no space between you and the universe that holds you. There is no there. There is only this. Let the thought settle like falling dusk. Because when distance finally disappears and the field's unity becomes the lens through which everything is seen, a final question drifts gently to the surface. If everything is one, if the field is the only interior, the only body, the only continuity, then what truly moves when you breathe? What truly changes when the universe unfolds? What truly passes when a moment ends? Is anything ever leaving? Or is everything simply changing its arrangement within a whole that never fractures? There is a softness in this question, a quiet invitation to release the tension of separation. Because no matter where you go, no matter what you become, no matter how many times the field reshapes its expression, you remain inside the same presence, unlost, unseparated, unbroken, a single interior holding itself through endless configurations. And in this final breath, as the idea of distance dissolves completely, the universe feels closer than ever, not as a vast expanse above you, but as a quiet continuity within you. Nothing outside, nothing separate, only the soft rhythm of a field that has always been one. Close your eyes. Let the thought drift to its quietest point. If everything is one interior, then what, truly, could you ever be distant from?